Throne of the North. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76 Absolute Crush. Half a year after the orcs moved south, the conflicts in the Northwind province were finally about to erupt. Some nobles lost their wealth and people, some nobles were unwilling to live on their land, and some nobles were purely because of conspiracy and political struggle. In Lingdu County, the conflict between Viscount Miles and Viscount Dragon has become irreconcilable. The second son of that Viscount, Maki Miles, has once again taken the army obtained from the Viscount's territory to his own fiefdom, where he had a fierce conflict with Enzo Dragon, Hatton said. He was similar to Ryan. If Ryan was blind, Hatton was half-blind about the situation in the Northwind province. The main reason was that the territory was a little far away from the territories of other nobles and was located in the border area. These things were all Hatton could know, and he even knew them because of Baron Barnes. Maybe the war is about to start. After Ryan finished speaking, Hatton couldn't help trembling and stared at Ryan closely. Leon, you must not leave. Don't worry, I will stay in Shenmue territory. With such a big incident in the Northwind province, Ryan could no longer be isolated in his own territory. By the way, please help me buy some weapons from Barnes or other nobles. The quality doesn't have to be too good. Remember not to say that they are what I want. Okay, Hatton agreed directly. In his opinion, this was Hatton's intention to arm his own territory, which was of course the best for him. One more thing, Ryan looked at Hatton. After all, the Hatton family was from the south and had a long history. Mr. Hatton, can you find a way to help me understand the situation in the Andorra Kingdom? Andorra Kingdom? Why do you want to know about it? They absolutely would not have the courage to invade the land of the Empire, even if the Northwind province was abandoned by the Empire, Hatton said. Even as a Baron of the Empire, he had strong self-confidence and pride. When Grand Duke Myers occupied the Northwind province, the Andorra Kingdom was frightened and offered a lot of wealth to prevent the Empire's army from advancing, but Hatton couldn't help sighing when he heard Ryan's request. Ryan, my family has been in decline, and my father even has only me as a child. News about the Andorra Kingdom. He looked at Ryan, and considering the alliance between the two of them, he gritted his teeth and said, I will write to the south, to my aunt who married the Earl's eldest son, and ask her to help keep an eye out. By the way, Ryan, why don't you write to the Clayton family? They must have the answer you want to know. Ryan shook his head and didn't explain. Hatton didn't know, but Ryan knew that as a family with a not-so-old heritage, the Clayton family, which has always been criticized by the great nobles of the Empire, is actually not harmonious at all. When he arrived in the frozen land, he had only 9 servants around him, and it was not that there were no people from the Clayton family who did bad things among them. Ryan also had a feeling in his heart, that is, to make all those who looked down on him regret it. Perhaps it was because of the youthful ambition of that young man that Ryan had never wanted to get anything from the Clayton family. In the next few days, Ryan lived in Baron Hatton's castle. During this period, of course, he arranged for Rosen to return to the frozen land territory and bring back another 300 people. More than 200 of them were servants composed of slaves. Anyway, when they came to Baron Hatton's territory, Ryan didn't have to worry about the food problem. Of course, he had to get some wool. But what made Ryan a little unbearable was that these days, the maids walking around in Hatton Castle were wearing less and less. Ryan looked at the picture of blood rushing. Baron Hatton was more nervous than Ryan imagined. When Ryan's army arrived in Shenmue territory, he almost threw all the previous fears behind his mind. If it weren't for Hatton's eldest son, Lane Hatton, who was still in good shape, Ryan would have suspected that the Hatton family might decline again. For this reason, Ryan was kind enough to bring him to the military camp to temper his blood and ki together. There was no way. Ryan felt that he could not control himself until he was 16 years old in the castle. The Clayton family's flame dragon night breathing method was originally derived from the ancient dragon, and dragons are also creatures with great blood and ki. However, the Clayton family is extremely strict in the training of the direct line. In this generation of Earl Clayton, all direct lines must lock their blood in essence until they are 16 years old, or before they become silver knights. Even other collateral branches of the family cannot have fun before the age of 13. The strict rules allowed the Clayton family to cross the gap with other Earl families in a short period of time, Otherwise it would not be said that he was the 5th Grand Duke of the Empire. The Knight of Water, the little water who inherited his father's territory, was even more impatient than his father. In mid-June, the new Knight of Water finally brought his army and once again stepped into the territory of Baron Hatton. Don't worry, Mr. Hatton. I will let that little guy know that the gap between a baron and a lord is never in words. Go to their granary and grab all the food for me. Don't worry about the unharvested food on the field. Hurry to the granary. There is a rushing river on the wide plain. The river irrigates the cultivated fields on both sides. It is also the largest field in the territory of Baron Hatton. At this moment, the young Nightwater was shouting loudly, and he couldn't help but look angry when he saw his noisy soldiers. Fortunately, the soldiers' suppression made the slaves slowly approach the granary. Seeing the serfs of Shenma territory fleeing in panic in front of his soldiers, Nightwater couldn't help but feel happy. Hatton family, how much wealth did you plunder from my father back then? I want you to pay it back tenfold. Nightwater gnashed his teeth and said, but at this moment, there was a deafening roar behind him. He turned around and saw hundreds of handsome war horses carrying fully armed knights rushing towards him, and behind the knights, hundreds of serf soldiers were charging with weapons in hand. They looked so orderly, much better than his own soldiers. The galloping war horses appeared in front of Nightwater in almost a breath. Looking at the cavalry so close, Nightwater and Bran's cold eyes met, and then he was knocked off the horse by a huge force. Kill! Bran's roar caused the army led by Nightwater to be in complete chaos. In just a moment, the war was over. In the dense forest in the distance, Ryan slowly came out and shook his head at the vulnerable army. The army is marching without even a scout. Can such a person lead the soldiers? Chapter 77 Ransom. When Ryan came to Nightwater, he looked down at Nightwater who had fallen off his horse and rolled in the mud. His calm eyes made Nightwater angry. I am also a noble, you are also a noble. Ryan looked at Water and laughed. He looked at the serf soldiers kneeling next to Nightwater. The meaning in his eyes was self-evident. Such a silent humiliation made Nightwater extremely angry. You are not from Shenma territory, who are you? He was shocked by the strength of this suddenly appeared army. This was definitely not something that Baron Hatton could have. You have 2 neighbors? How come you don't know now? Ryan looked at Water, whose angry expression froze and became extremely shocked. You are the Baron of the Frozen Earth territory. Nightwater was shocked. How could the Frozen Earth territory, which was rumored to be the poorest and coldest in the entire empire, have such a powerful military force? Those cavalrymen, each of them was an apprentice knight who had been separated from production. This made Nightwater unable to understand. This was an extraordinary army, just like the power controlled by those powerful nobles. Okay, you don't need to say anything more. Tie him up and send him to Baron Hatton, Ryan said, pulled the reins and turned to leave. When the huge team returned to Shenma territory, Hatton was nervous. When he saw Nightwater tied up tightly, Hatton laughed. Little Water, you dare to challenge the authority of my master Hatton. You are just like your dead father. You don't have a noble brain at all. You are a fool who only knows how to use force. Baron Hatton shook his head and sighed. This is the gap. Although we are all nobles, it is obvious that you don't have the brain that a noble should have. You don't even have the qualifications to become a lord? Looking at Nightwater, whose eyes were about to spit fire, Ryan shook his head. Baron Hatton's attack power in this regard was still very good. He is handed over to you. I think Baron Roche will not be stingy with a ransom of a lord, Ryan said, turned around and left. This war did not put any pressure on him. Dozens of miles away from Shenma territory, this territory is called Crow territory, which belongs to Baron Roche. With the capture of Nightwater, the news soon reached the ears of the Baron. Baron Roche, who was eating snow-white bread in the fortress, behaved elegantly, but the next moment he was disturbed by the panicked voice outside. My lord, it's not good. Your lordship, Nightwater was captured alive by Baron Hatton, and they sent someone to ask you for a ransom of 20,000 gold coins. Baron Roche listened to the panicked voice outside and couldn't help but look angry. You are making a fuss. Can't you see that I am eating? Drag him down and beat him to death. Soon, panicked and frightened voices begging for mercy came from outside, but Roche didn't care. Next to him, Baron Roche's steward came up respectfully and said, My lord, Nightwater is a lord knight in your territory. Should we pay a ransom of 20,000 gold coins? Baron Roche sneered and said, 20,000 gold coins. That fat guy Hatton who only knows how to eat and drink has a really big appetite. If I don't give it, would he dare to come to me with his army? Moreover, that idiot Water is just a relative from the Myers family. He dares not to take me seriously. For so long, he hasn't sent me a single gold coin. It would be fine if he was a direct descendant of the Myers family, but a mere lord dares to disrespect me. It's just right. Let's take this opportunity to meet our old friend. If Baron Hatton's father is still alive, he should be very disappointed. Ha ha ha. The butler's eyes showed fear. He knew a lot about the Roche family. For example, Baron Roche had gathered 300 powerful warriors, including 50 cavalrymen, under the militarism. This was a force that could not be ignored in the entire Baron's circle. Only the Viscount could say that he could suppress Master Roche. Take advantage of this opportunity to grab all of Baron Hatton's iron ore and farmland, and we will be able to survive the winter smoothly this year. Baron Roche's eyes showed ambition. Recently, there were conflicts and collisions between the nobles in the territory. The county governor and the governor above had no intention of intervening. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to expand his influence and wealth. Baron Hatton's castle. Less than 2 days later, Ryan had just returned from the frozen land. Before he could wait for Baron Roche's response, he saw a bloated woman making a big fuss in the Baron's castle. Hatton, release my Walter. Zara, this is not the place for you to be so presumptuous. Baron Hatton's expression was particularly angry. This woman from the Myers family, the mother of Knight Walter, actually came to his territory in person and asked him to release Lord Walter. My Walter is also a noble, Hatton. You can't imprison him as a prisoner. He is free, a lord of the Empire, and a noble. Also, you must call me by my name. I am Zara Myers, from the Grand Duke's territory in the south of the Empire. You are just a country baron, and you dare to yell at me. Ryan walked in from outside and asked Baron Hatton with some doubts. If I remember correctly, the Lord of the Empire will not be established until this year's God's Grace Festival. There is no lord or noble now. Baron Hatton, is this Bucket Lady your guest? Hearing the word Bucket Lady from Ryan's mouth, the originally roaring lady suddenly looked at Ryan with great anger. Under his young and handsome face, she paused for a moment and became angry again. Who are you to dare to insult the women of the Grand Duke's family? There are many women in the Grand Duke Myers family, so don't flatter yourself. Ryan waved his hand and pointed at himself. I am also a noble. In this situation, Ms. Bucket, you should respectfully call me Baron. In addition, Nightwater was captured in the war. According to the tradition among nobles, you can take him away, but the premise is that you must pay enough ransom, 20,000 gold coins. If you can take it out, you can take Nightwater away, 20,000. Ms. Bucket's voice became sharp, like a hen with its feathers standing on end. You are blackmailing me. Yes, this is blackmail. It seems that you don't think your son is worth that much? Fortunately, we are not asking you for it, but Baron Roche, to whom Nightwater is loyal. Chapter 78 War. Finally, the angry Bucket Lady was driven away. Baron Hatton's face flushed a little. He looked at Ryan with a little admiration in his eyes. Ryan, how did you make this bitch faint? The charm of language. Don't worry, others will know that it was the brave Baron Hatton who drove away a bitch from the Knight territory. Hatton was immediately proud of it. 2 more days passed, and the response from Baron Roche that Ryan had been waiting for finally came. Ryan, it's bad. Roche, that damn guy, actually showed up in my territory with his army. Hatton ran to Ryan in a panic, and it seemed that he didn't even put on his clothes properly, and his face was full of fear. My slave said that Baron Roche's army numbered tens of thousands and had already broken into my farm from the south. Tens of thousands. Ryan looked helpless. Do your slaves know how to count? They can actually tell how many people are on the other side. Has Baron Roche moved the entire territory here? Hearing Ryan's words, Hatton also reacted and said angrily, the damn slave actually dared to deceive the noble Lord Hatton. I'm going to beat him to death. Let's go meet this Baron first. With the help of the soldiers, Ryan also wore gorgeous mithril armor and rode a warhorse. Hatton next to him followed suit, but the knight's armor looked a little bloated, not inferior to that of the Bucket Lady. Behind him, hundreds of soldiers standing neatly in a row also made Hatton appear to be brave enough to command the country, and his huge body was a little excited. Ryan, if I give the order to charge, they will definitely rush out, right? Hatton had a climax-like fantasy, and then he was poured with a basin of cold water by Ryan and shivered. No, maybe your son can make those dozens of people rush out if he speaks up. Hatton was a little discouraged. He still knew his own abilities, but he soon became proud that his eldest son was better than himself. In order to show his strength, Hatton still organized 300 to 500 serfs to follow the army, and then slowly moved towards the farm in the south. Ryan was also a little speechless. Baron Roche didn't look like a noble who was good at military warfare. When Ryan arrived at the farm with his army, he looked at the huge army in front of him. There was no surprise, and his scouts didn't send any different news. Baron Roche really brought these hundreds of people here to wait for them. Ryan didn't know whether he was showing off or confident in the strength of his army. In short, the war between nobles was so rough. Everyone pulled out 2 armies of serfs, and then chose a battlefield to charge each other. This is also the reason why Nightwater, who was attacked from behind, had no resistance at all. Simple and crude, without any redundancy. In this world, the most fundamental gap between nobles and civilians comes from 2 points: extraordinary power and knowledge. But these 2 can also be regarded as one. Enough knowledge contains the extraordinary, and the extraordinary can also bring more knowledge. But even so, in terms of military warfare, there are still not many nobles who have talent or master some military knowledge. Looking at the hundreds of soldiers who are still in good shape around Baron Roche, Ryan understands that the Roche family is indeed going to surpass Baron Hatton. Maybe their ancestors left some books about war, military affairs, and soldier training. But that's it. Seeing Hatton's arrival, Roche also came out with a crowd and started the standard trash talk before the war between nobles. Baron Hatton, you have kidnapped my lord, a noble of the empire, without any aristocratic etiquette. I now inform you in the name of the imperial nobles to release Lord Water immediately and compensate Lord Water for his mental damages of 20,000 gold coins. Roche, you are a sinister and cunning guy. You ordered Nightwater to break into my territory, and you dare to ask me for gold coins. Baron Hatton was furious and drew out the knight's sword with some difficulty. You are a sinister and cunning guy, just like your father. You should not be a crow, but a vulture that eats carrion. You are not worthy of being a noble. You are not qualified to insult my father. Baron Roche also became angry. Hatton, you are just like your dead father, without any wisdom, just a pig. Charge, I want to tie that dead fat pig back and kneel in front of my father's grave. With Roche's order, the 700 or 800 messy soldiers behind him rushed forward, and the pressure brought by the 50 knights in the lead still made Baron Hatton calm down a little. The result of calmness was that Baron Hatton also raised his sword. Charge, kill them all, and catch that guy Roche for me. I want to lock him in the pigsty. Not many people responded to him, but fortunately Ryan raised his hand, and the more than 800 serf soldiers behind him also rushed out without any rules. But the hundreds of fully armed cavalrymen behind him did not move. Follow what I taught you, Brand, follow your will. A deep voice came from under Knight Brand's visor, and then hundreds of knights turned their horses silently, quickly bypassed a distance, trampled on the farm, and appeared on the side of the battlefield. Leon, do you remember what I taught you? Ryan said, and the eldest son of Baron Hatton, who was quietly standing next to him, also became a little excited at this moment. Mr. Ryan, I will do what you say. After saying that, the warhorse under him moved forward, and Leon's childish voice was drowned in the chaotic battlefield, but fortunately, his identity and the hide of his warhorse still made the surrounding soldiers gather around him. Shield soldiers, squat down quickly and put your shoulders against your shields. Spear soldiers, don't move. Put down your spears and put them against your shields. Don't mess around. Don't mess around. I'll kill anyone who dares to run around, Leon shouted excitedly, but in this chaotic battlefield, not many people could follow his orders. Only less than 100 people gathered together, holding their weapons with pale faces, and looked at the dozens of cavalrymen in front of them, who were trembling on the ground, rushing towards them. No one is not afraid of death. If the slaves in these noble territories were not so afraid of death, there would have been no slaves in this world. Extreme fear is a test of one's character. In short, whether it is because the fear of the nobles has overcome the fear of death, or whether they are so scared that they can't move, the cavalry has appeared in front of them. The serf soldiers who were standing in front of them and didn't even know where to run were knocked away by the fierce war horses in an instant, vomiting blood in midair, and twitching when they fell to the ground, escaping from death. The bloody tearing of the Shenma leader's defense line, the cavalrymen roared with their blood boiling, but the next moment, after knocking away the soldiers who were close at hand, the sharp edge of the spear appeared in front of them. Before the cavalrymen could react, the horses had already let out a painful neigh, and then the knights on them felt dizzy, and the whole person fell off the back of the warhorse with a heavy armor, hitting the ground dizzy. If they had not practiced the knight's breathing method, they would probably have died at this time. "Idiot, what are you doing? Kill them," Leon roared in the distance. He was angry at the serf soldiers who were stunned in the face of the falling knights, but he himself held the knight's sword with a white palm and did not dare to move forward. Chapter 79, The Cavalry's Destruction. Of the 50 cavalrymen, at least 15 had their horses pierced by spears and fell to the ground by the huge impact force. However, even so, there were only 7 or 8 serfs who dared to rush up to finish them off. This resulted in only 5 knights dying at that moment. With a strong physique brought by the breathing technique, they adapted to the dizziness of falling to the ground. Even though they were lying on the ground in pain, the knights' swords in their hands cut off the legs of the serfs who surrounded them. The wails on the ground came one after another, with the pain of the horses, the roars of the knights, and more of the fear of the serfs who lost their arms and legs. Time on the battlefield changed rapidly. The cavalrymen who were knocked off their horses were besieged by many serfs, and the other cavalrymen who reacted in the rear rushed over to rescue their companions. At this time, on the side of the battlefield, Brand led hundreds of majestic cavalrymen into the battlefield of the serf soldiers. The knights' lances, accompanied by the charge of the war horses, almost linked the serfs together. Many knights were not strong enough to throw them away, so they could only drop their knights' lances and draw their knights' swords to start slashing. But for Brand at the front, the war made his blood boil. The shadow of the stag was looming, and his fighting spirit was magnificent. He roared, and the 3-meter-long knight's lance in his palm was raised. The 3 or 5 soldiers pierced by the lance were shaken by the terrible force and directly torn into pieces. The bloody flesh and blood scattered everywhere, making the surrounding infantry who were already terrified almost insane. Charge! To capture the thief, you must first capture the king. In such a war, Brand led hundreds of cavalrymen and rushed towards Baron Roche. Looking at the cavalry rushing towards him, Baron Roche was horrified and screamed in fear. "Quick, stop them, stop them, if you can't stop them, all of you will die, stop them." Faced with the appearance of the cavalry, the semi-trained soldiers under Baron Roche were still steady in their steps. They did not flee like the serfs. They raised their spears, but they miscalculated Brand's strength. Brand, who was at the peak of the bronze knight, was probably no less powerful than the weaker silver knights. What made these soldiers even more desperate was that the knight's spear in the opponent's hand swept across at the most critical moment, directly throwing their weapons aside, and then the charging warhorse with a force of thousands of pounds hit their chests. The bones sank at this moment, and the soldiers flying in the air knocked down more soldiers. When those soldiers wanted to get up, what appeared in front of them was a large shadow and the iron hooves of the warhorse. Boom! The charge of the Knight Legion was so overwhelming. On the battlefield of cold weapons, this was the most unsolvable power. At the back, Baron Roche's cavalry also rushed back at this time. Between saving their cavalry companions and saving their own Baron Master, they chose the latter. "Don't fight," Brand roared, and then the entire cavalry army split into 2 in tacit understanding, evacuating in the east and west directions of the battlefield. When their tail also rushed out of the crowd of infantry, Baron Roche's cavalry finally arrived. However, before people and horses could catch their breath, the leading knight screamed in horror. "Don't stop! Charge out!" However, it was too late. Facing the infantry phalanx of their own camp, the cavalry had inevitably chosen to slow down. When they heard the voice of the leader, they heard the roar of the iron hooves of the war horses trampling on the ground. They were very familiar with this sound. Many times before, they had run like this. It was the sound of the war horses going all out and not retaining any physical strength. Every time the huge weight trampled on the ground, it would leave a hoof print that could stand up a wooden pole. They turned their heads and saw cavalry charging towards them. There were 50 cavalry on each side of the east and west, surrounding them and the surrounding infantry. At this moment, the infantry were all around them. These cavalry who had stopped their speed could no longer pick up their speed again. They returned to save their noble lords, but they also put their army in a desperate situation. At this moment, Brand's target changed from Baron Roche to these cavalry and the infantry who were thrown into disarray by the cavalry. The wind was whistling in their ears, but the body of each knight was filled with burning blood. When they rushed towards the enemy in front again after more than 10 seconds, the sharpness of the knight's sword instantly cut off the heads of those knights who were as tall as them but not as fast as them. "Kill! Two cavalry teams of 40 or 50 people cut a huge battlefield into 3 parts. They charged with all their strength without any pause. It was not until the sound of the iron hooves of the war horses faded away that the surviving soldiers came to their senses. Strong fear surged in their hearts. These soldiers could no longer care about the whistling and roaring around them. In other words, in such chaos and fear, they could not hear the orders at all and began to run towards the place they thought was safe. Brandler in the distance turned his horse's head, not intending to expand the victory, but looked at the noble baron. Without repair, the horse's blood was constantly decreasing. He wanted to take this opportunity to end the war. Charge! The trampling of the iron hooves on the battlefield was like the whisper of the god of death. The soldiers who were in fear did not dare to stand in front of the cavalry. In fact, the calm breathing sound under the mask ended, and Brando also came to Baron Roche. The knight's sword in his hand fell, and the tall horse's head broke. The blood gushing like a column fell on his cold armor and on Baron Roche's face, which was so frightened that he fainted. It is unknown whether Baron Roche was really fainted or it was the standard attitude among nobles. In short, when Baron Hatton woke up in his castle, the Baron started bargaining. "I am willing to pay the ransom, I am willing to pay the ransom." Looking at the stinking environment around him, Baron Roche fainted again, his entire face submerged in the dark filth. When he woke up the second time, Baron Roche was also cleaned up, and there was not much smell on his body, but Baron Hatton, in his constant joy, still shook his hand in front of his nose without hesitation. This made Baron Roche fall into great humiliation. "Baron Hatton, you are insulting a noble of the Empire. Baron Roche should think about how much gold coins you plan to use to redeem your freedom. By the way, there is also Lord Water, on the side," Ryan said calmly, causing Roche's gaze to shift from Hatton's face to Ryan. "Lord of the Frozen Territory, Baron Ryan, everyone underestimates you." Chapter 80 Ransom and Indemnity. He did not lose to Baron Hatton, but he lost a nobleman from the Frozen Territory, the most forgotten territorial nobleman in the North Wind Province. Roche stared at Ryan. He could not imagine how such a broken place in the Frozen Territory could have such soldiers. The only answer might be Earl Clayton. "Tell me, how much money do you need to release me?" At this moment, Roche was a little desperate. The turmoil in the North Wind Province was about to come. He wanted to concentrate the wealth and resources in the territories of several knights in Baron Hatton, so as to sell them for a good price, but now he no longer had the confidence. In the North Wind Province, the military strength was far greater than the means of political struggle of the nobles. If it was in the south, a noble without an army might be able to deal with a powerful noble, but it was impossible here. The nobles in the North Wind Province had nothing without military strength. His father saw this very clearly, so he was able to raise hundreds of soldiers, instead of the other nobles who could only use the serfs who would run away as soon as they went to the battlefield. But now Roche stared at Ryan, and he swore that he would never forget the humiliation of today. Ahem. Ryan cleared his throat, then laughed and looked at Baron Roche. Since Baron Roche is willing to use gold coins to redeem his freedom, it couldn't be better. Let's do the math. First, you, the 5th-class noble of the Empire, Baron Roche, how many gold coins are you willing to pay to buy your life and freedom? 5,000 gold coins, Roche said immediately. 5,000, Hatton next to him shouted. Roche, you are only worth 5,000? Without 50,000 gold coins, don't even think about leaving my territory. 50,000 gold coins, why don't you go and rob Hatton? Humph. Roche, you have a barren territory, and 3 knight territories, and you have at least 5 iron mines. Tell me you can't come up with 50,000 gold coins. Hatton was quite familiar with Roche's Crow Ridge, after all, they were old rivals. Do you think gold coins fall from the sky? 10,000 gold coins, I will pay a maximum of 10,000 gold coins to redeem myself, otherwise I will wait for the noble council to come to you. Roche looked at Ryan. After all, he lost to the Baron of the Frozen Land Territory. Ryan nodded and said, well, Baron Roche will pay each of our 2 barons 10,000 gold coins to redeem his freedom. I only said 10,000. Roche was still roaring, his heart was bleeding. Ryan looked at Roche and said with a smile, 10,000 in total? For this amount of gold coins, why don't I go to Crow Ridge in person? I think I will have everything by then. What do you think, Baron Roche? Ryan's words made Roche silent. Looking at his reaction, Ryan continued, then next, it's your soldiers, Baron Roche. We have captured a total of 560 soldiers from Crow Ridge. Each soldier is a precious treasure, at least 30 gold coins per person. 30? Most of them are slaves. What are you thinking about 30 gold coins per slave? Ryan's hands were slumped. How could I not know there were slaves among them? You have to know that on the battlefield, they are all warriors who have taken up weapons. Impossible. Serfs can be charged at most 10 gold coins each, and other soldiers can be charged at 25 gold coins each. This is the rule among nobles. Hearing Roche's words, Ryan and Hatton looked at each other, and the latter nodded. Well, then it's 9,300 gold coins, 9,500 gold coins. Hearing Ryan and the other two being so easy to talk to, Roche suddenly had a bad idea in his heart. He reacted and looked at Ryan. My knights, where are they? Them? None of them survived. Hearing this answer, Roche felt dizzy. Roche stared at Ryan's handsome face, his fingers were pinched white. And knight what? He is your lord. Since your own ransom is 10,000, then for this lord, 5,000 each of us is not too much, right? Ryan said, looking at the desperate Baron Roche, who was still immersed in the ending of his cavalry being annihilated, and silently accepted Ryan's proposal. Then next, it's the issue of compensation for our two nobles, Ryan said, and both Roche and Hatton opened their eyes wide. What else? What else? Ryan looked at Baron Roche, a little puzzled. What? Is it strange? I was a guest in Mr. Hutton's territory, but suddenly, your lord, Nightwater, came with a large group of people to plunder Mr. Hutton's wealth, and then you came with a huge army. This is a war, an invasion of territory. According to the rules of the nobility, we have unlimited rights of defense. You started the war, but the end of the war is not up to you to choose. If there is no war reparations, when will the war end? Baron Roche is a nobleman. He won't be naive to think that we don't have the strength to continue this war, right? Hutton echoed excitedly. That's right, Raj. It was you who started the war. If there is no war reparations, it means that the war is not over yet. The war between the Crow territory and the Shema territory will continue. Ryan looked at Baron Roche and nodded. The damage and impact caused by the war need to be compensated with gold coins. How much do you want? Baron Roche stared at Ryan's face. He used to think that this black-haired, red-eyed boy from the Clayton family was a symbol of nobility, but now he only felt that it was the face of a devil. In a word, the damage caused by this war will cost at least 100,000 gold coins, Ryan said. The redemption of prisoners could not compare to the compensation for the war itself. 100,000 gold coins, not a single gold coin less. Hatton's eyes were shining, and he said excitedly. 100,000 gold coins? That's absolutely impossible. 50,000 at most. Ryan interrupted Roche and said, Baron Roche, I don't think you have realized your position yet. 100,000 gold coins is a number that cannot be bargained for. Crow Ridge can't come up with that much. We can supplement it with food or iron ore and wrought iron, or even pay it off by the end of this year. There is no room for bargaining for the loser in war reparations. In this, you are no longer a noble, but a loser, Ryan said, making the blood on Roche's face completely disappear. Chapter 81 My wife gave birth. It's a big profit. Hatton was ecstatic in the castle, and even looked at the maids around him less. Don't worry, 70,000 of these 100,000 gold coins are mine, Ryan said indifferently. Hatton was stunned and stared at Ryan with a bit of unkindness, as if Ryan was a thief who robbed him of his wealth. Mr. Hatton, you have to understand that I won this war. If we discuss it carefully, all the war reparations should fall into my hands, but I just don't want to do that. In addition, those weapons and armor on the battlefield should also be at least 70% of my spoils. Finally, this war was invited by you, Mr. Hatton, so in addition to the food we agreed on, you have to give us some gold coins to reward us for our victory in this war. Hatton listened to Ryan's words, counted his fingers, and looked at Ryan with a pale face after a long time. Lion, you devil, my gold coins. Although he cried, Hatton had no intention of resisting. He also knew Ryan's military strength and he must not offend his neighbor. A war completed most of Ryan's transactions with Mihai, and after a few days of negotiations, he bought all the remaining ones. With the wealth gained from the war, Ryan also returned to the frozen territory. Instructing Beard to continue to go to the kingdom of Andorra to buy food and bring all the weapons and armor, Ryan once again frequently traveled between the Furnace City and the frozen territory. However, on the last day of the warmest month of the year, Ryan received the envoy from Baron Barnes in the castle of the frozen territory. My master asked me to say hello to Baron Ryan on his behalf. I hope the Flower of the North Wind will witness your friendship with my master." Ryan smiled and nodded. "I have always been a friend of Baron Barnes." After the polite talk, Ryan asked the knight in front of him, "I wonder why Baron Barnes sent you here?" The knight named Barak said respectfully, "My master sincerely invites you and your army to station in the castle of North Wind Flower." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. It seems that Baron Barnes also knows about his war with Baron Roche, and now he is inviting him. The contradictions between the nobles in the North Wind province have become primitive and barbaric as the laws of the empire have gone away. In Lingdu County, the elderly Viscount Miles no longer has the ability to suppress everyone. Viscount Dragon is his natural opponent. Now there is a third party. Aristocrats like Barnes are not willing to become the younger brothers of the two Viscounts. But Ryan did not mean to refuse. The pressure brought by the nearly 20,000 people of the city of Furnace entering the frozen land can only be relieved by war. The time of war can allow him to perfectly handle the frozen land with so many people. He looked at Barak in front of him, a knight at the peak of the Brent's Knights, who was proud of the entire Baron's circle. "So, what can I get? What will I bear? In the end, what will I become?" Ryan's three questions made Barak in front of him a little confused. He was just a knight, not a nobleman, and didn't quite understand what Ryan meant. "Let's do this. You go back with my questions and tell Baron Barnes that I can go to his castle of the Flower of the North Wind, but at the same time, I need food and gold coins. I will work with him to resist the pressure from higher nobles. At the same time, I must have absolute control over my army. Even if his military war fails, I need to take over his army to ensure the interests of both of us." Go back with my original words. If Baron Barnes agrees, then my army will enter the castle of the Flower of the North Wind with a friendly attitude. It is known as the oldest fortress on this land. After Ryan finished speaking, Barak left. After all, he still failed to make a decision on behalf of Baron Barnes' will. It seems that the position of Lord in Baron Barnes's territory is unlikely to be related to him. On the first day of July, Ryan learned the good news that Viscount Whitman had given birth. When Ryan came down from Rhinoceros Horn Mountain, he saw the old housekeeper and Mr. Yez with his newly married wife, standing anxiously outside a stone fortress. "Mr. Yez is so anxious?" Ryan asked with a smile, looking at the woman next to him, who also had a slightly bulging belly. "This is my grandson, and a grandson with the blood of the Viscount, a natural inheritor of the Viscount." Yez suddenly stopped in the middle of his speech. He was still old, and only then did he realize that there was only one noble in the frozen land. "Master Ryan, I'm just happy for my daughter." Ryan nodded, then looked at the maid who came out and asked, "How is the lady's health?" Giving birth to a woman is always a journey before the gates of hell, and even many nobles cannot avoid it. For example, Baron Hatton's wife died because of giving birth. It is unknown why Hatton has never remarried. "Madam has given birth to a young lady, and she is in good health now," the maid said respectfully. Not long after, Ryan and Yaz also met the Viscountess with sweat on her face. "Thank you, Master Ryan. If the medical skills you brought can be spread, I am afraid that many women can be saved," the Viscountess said sincerely, and Ryan also smiled slightly. "Yes, it seems that you are in good condition. The female officials in my castle will have a strict teacher in the future." The Viscountess didn't know what she thought of, and her face turned red. "I will teach them well. In the frozen land territory, no one can just enjoy themselves. The families of Yaz and others have to open up and manage the wasteland. Of course, the Viscountess also needs to work to get paid." Ryan said a few more words of encouragement, and his eyes glanced at the old butler not far away, who nodded slightly at him. "Well, you have a good rest. I will leave first." Ryan and the old butler left the room, and the latter took out a slender crystal container, which was a gift from Master Lula to repay Ryan for his help. In the crystal container, there was a drop of bright red blood, from the baby girl of Viscount Whitman's family. The Viscount's family heritage, something that can be preserved by a great wizard, must be very precious, right? Ryan returned to the fortress on the Rhino Horn Mountain. In order to ensure safety, he specially invited the wizard Luna. The latter was also very curious about what Ryan said. This kind of magic, even she had never come into contact with it before. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82, The Legacy of the Ancient Nobles, the Sanctuary-level Knight Combat Skills. The forbidden magic of the Amethyst Master. According to legend, every amethyst created has terrible power. The master actually used a purple crystal specifically to seal the bloodline technique. Usually this is a method that only sorcerers can master. If the magic factor of the Exner continent had not been frozen, the master should have already become a sanctuary master, Master Luna said with some emotion. This is how magicians are. Others can feel the power of their masters through magic creations. The Amethyst Master in the Exner continent did not know whether he could break through to the sanctuary, but he came to another world and his chance of becoming a sanctuary was higher than that of the Amethyst Master. Only blood can open the inheritance, Ryan said, dropping that drop of blood on the purple crystal in the center of the palm of the Luna Master Golem puppet. The next moment, a hair-like crack appeared on the surface of the purple crystal. Then a radiance bloomed from it. At the moment the purple crystal was broken, a large amount of information gathered together and fell into the minds of the people around. Of course, there were only Ryan, Brand, and Luna Mage around. Ryan was shocked. His consciousness seemed to have entered a dark world. In this dark world, two flames appeared in a trance. No, they were two eyes. As the huge creature got closer and closer, Ryan saw that it was a tall and mighty stag bathed in the glory of divinity. Its tall eyes like lanterns stared at Ryan, and then the stag let out a deafening roar. It rushed towards Ryan, burning with blood-red flames. The moment it rushed towards Ryan, Ryan felt as if the whole world was squeezing towards him, the earth was shrinking, and he was even more insignificant. The blood-red stag in front of him finally trampled in his terrified eyes. Boom! A blood-red stag of the same color appeared on Ryan's body. At this moment, his majestic blood gathered into a second stag. With the roar of the stag, all the power turned into a shield, and a spear appeared in Ryan's hand. He raised the shield in his hand, blocking the charge of the violent blood-red stag in the darkness, and thrust out the spear in his hand at the same time. All the darkness dissipated, and Ryan woke up, feeling the boiling blood in his body. His Deer Spirit Night Breathing method also caught up with the Flame Dragon Night Breathing method, reaching the stage of Bronze Knight, and the strength of his physical ki and blood increased again. Seeing Ryan wake up, the huge golem puppet, Mage Luna was a little surprised. I thought you would be later than him, but I didn't expect your mental power to be stronger than I thought. Mage Lula looked at Brand who was gradually waking up and said to Ryan, you are so lucky to have knight fighting skills at the level of the Holy Land Knight. In the former Exner continent, there were no more than 10 noble families that had such fighting skills. If you can reach the Holy Land in the future, you may have the opportunity to combine these two knight fighting machines into one, forming a legendary fighting skill that belongs to you alone. This is a key to your way to the Holy Land. It may not be the only key, but you cannot do without this thing if you want to become a Holy Land. You can also use it to peek into the power of legend. The following words of Master Luna were said to Brand. Because she could also see that Ryan had more than one trace of night breathing method, and it was even more powerful. She was also shocked that one person could practice two night breathing methods, and there was no conflict at all. Of course, what was even more shocking was that you actually inherited the will of the Deer Spirit. No wonder you can appear in Exner. It seems that at the moment of death, the stag spirit found hope for itself. Master Luna looked at Ryan. Although she was a magician, she was also a citizen of Exner, and her worship of the Deer Spirit had not completely disappeared. I will have my own path, Brand whispered aside. This sanctuary-level knight's fighting skills gave him a great shock. It turned out that there was such a big gap between knights, but he was not immersed in it. The stag shield and the spear of the hero. The former can allow the knight holding the shield to use the Deer Spirit breathing method to activate the shield to play a 180% efficient defense effect, while the spear can penetrate the knight's fighting spirit, or enhance the piercing of sharp weapons by 30% to 50%. This is the power of the extraordinary. In Ryan's view, this is probably to use a unique enchantment method to increase defense by 80% and penetration by 50%. Of course, it all depends on the knight's own extraordinary system. Among the many extraordinary roads, the knight is not the most powerful, but it is definitely the most stable. Only the Deer Spirit breathing method can activate it. It seems that we have really made a lot of money, Ryan said with a smile. His extraordinary army finally had the potential to become an extraordinary legion at this moment. In the future, he will be able to form a Nightmare Knights corps comparable to Grand Duke Myers and the Flame Dragon Knights corps of the Clayton family. Even a terrifying existence like a dragon can be hunted down. This looks more like an infantry corps. Spirit of the Stag, the former Exner was originally dominated by infantry, Luna added on the side. She once spent a lot of energy to understand the history of Exner in order to find ancient magic resources. The emergence of the two knight combat skills made the army under Ryan's command more powerful, but with it, the consumption of practicing combat skills also increased day by day. With only 195 knight attendants, he once again felt the pressure on food. Perhaps, we should cultivate several types of livestock on a large scale, Ryan said. He remembered that some domesticated livestock were actually wild beasts at first, but they changed slowly. The second day of July. Barnes's messenger, Knight Barak, came to the frozen territory again. Although his brain might not be very bright, his execution ability was recognized by Barnes and Ryan. Looking at the horse that was still panting and trembling, Ryan then got Barnes' answer. He agreed to Ryan's request, but said that the spoils would be distributed according to military merit. Of course, he would not be stingy with the consumption of food for Ryan's army. So Ryan took the time to go to the Furnace City, and after most of the people who had no jobs came to the frozen territory, he once again took his army and left the Northern Territory. Chapter 83, The Struggle for Wealth and the Redivision of Land. Ryan did not bring only 100 people this time, but brought nearly 200 of his knight attendants and 800 ordinary serfs and civilian soldiers. He knew very well that this time he was leaving, it was not a small fight, and he would not be back in half a month. The army of the frozen land crossed the mountains and swamps, which put Baron Hatton under great pressure. He sent people to come, and when he learned that they were not coming to attack him, he was completely relieved. Not long ago, I also sent some soldiers in Leon and to Baron Barnes's North Windflower Fortress. Ryan, do you think we can be the opponent of the Viscount? Hatton was still quite afraid of the two Viscounts of Lingdu County. Don't worry, Mr. Hatton, no matter what, you, the Baron, will not be in any trouble. At that time, you can just say that it was Leon's private action, Ryan said calmly. He knew Hatton's worries. After all, in Hatton's view, Baron Barnes and Baron Ryan were a little bold. Ryan's army crossed Hatton's territory, and then it was not so easy to go, because he could not let his army appear in the territories of other nobles, and could only walk in the wilderness outside those territories. The wilderness that had hardly been developed was not so easy to walk. If it were not for the most important thing in Ryan's army to enforce discipline, there would even be deaths along the way. His 1,000 troops finally appeared in Baron Barnes's territory. Although 800 of them had no combat power, Baron Barnes didn't know that. He looked at the neatly standing army and was a little shocked in his heart. Baron Ryan, the entire North Wind province underestimated you, Baron Barnes, who was a little vicissitudes of life, said with shock and surprise. Many nobles in the empire were of this age, because they had to wait until their fathers died before they could inherit the title, and at this time they were no longer young. Even Baron Barnes's eldest son was 1 year older than Ryan. I have marked out a large area of wasteland and built houses. Your soldiers can live in it. Barnes led Ryan to the military training ground he specially opened. It was very large and could accommodate 2,000 to 3,000 people. After all, it was impossible to really let all the soldiers enter the North Windflower Castle. Only a few knights and attendants could enjoy such treatment. This land is a bit too rough. Looking at the barren training ground in front of him and the houses that did not look solid, Ryan frowned. My soldiers will rebuild their own residences. Baron Barnes needs you to provide some trees, there are mountains not far away. Baron Ryan, just arrange some people to prepare. After settling the soldiers, Ryan took his knights and attendants to the North Windflower Castle. On the hillside not far away, the ancient castle witnessed the history of the North Wind province for hundreds of years. There are even rumors that this is one of the top 3 fortresses in the North Wind province in terms of solidity. A peak sanctuary wizard once carved solid magic. If it were not big enough, Ryan felt that the earls would have ideas. With this castle, your territory is completely worry-free, Ryan said with some envy. This was true. If his fortress on the Rhinohorn Mountain was built, it would be easy to defend and difficult to attack, but the fortress itself could not compare to the North Windflower for the time being. But after helping Master Luna complete the construction of the Master Tower, Ryan could make a request. The control and influence of the golem puppet on the stone is even greater than that of the Holy Domain Master. Hearing Ryan's words, Barnes also showed pride in his eyes. The vision of his ancestors gave him the confidence to fight against other nobles in Lingdu County. It's time now, Baron Barnes, can you tell me how many nobles you have gathered at the banquet to welcome Ryan? Seeing that there were only Leon and himself besides the people of the Barnes family, Ryan already had a guess in his heart. Sure enough, Baron Barnes sighed. Baron Ryan, there are still too few nobles who support us. Except for Baron Hatton and you, the rest of them only expressed their ideas secretly, but in the end, they were still won over by the two viscounts. This is normal. One of the two viscounts has Lingdu City, which is invincible, and the other is said to have an army of 3,000 soldiers under his command, which is not comparable to us. It's just that I'm a little curious, Baron Barnes, why are you unwilling to accept their kindness? With your strength, any viscount will give you enough benefits, right? What they give is not as much as what we robbed ourselves. Barnes looked at Ryan and finally told him the interests behind this matter. Ryan, do you know that in the southwest of Lingdu County, starting from Lingdu City and crossing the Carmelin River in the Ice Peak Forest, a magic crystal vein was discovered? Magic crystal vein? Ryan opened his eyes wide at this moment, staring at Baron Barnes tightly, and couldn't help asking. What scale of magic crystal mine? It's just a small one. Baron Barnes shook his head and smiled. He knew what Ryan was thinking. A small magic crystal mine can only dig out 100,000 magic crystals at most, but this is also a huge fortune. Ryan, you know, the value of magic crystals is higher than the same gold coins. Ryan also felt a little regretful. If it was a medium or large one, he would have to go back to the frozen land and pull out the Luna Mage. The Luna Mage would be interested in a small magic crystal mine, but Ryan would not be willing to expose the biggest trump card of the frozen land so easily. But in the Ice Peak Forest, some iron ores and a gold mine were discovered around the magic crystal veins. The value of the gold mine currently surveyed may be higher than the magic crystal mine. If we join the two viscounts, it would be good if we could get some gold coins in the end, but the magic crystal mine is more important to me. 2 of my children have been detected to have good magical talents, and there is also the Flower of the North Wind. This castle needs a part of magic crystals as a supplement every year. As long as there are enough magic crystals, no one can break into my castle. Baron Barnes explained half of the reason, and the rest was his own thoughts, but even so, it was enough for him to make up his mind to compete with the two viscounts. Of course, Ryan, the reason behind this is not only the division of these mineral veins, but also the territorial division of the entire Northwind province. In Lingdu County, Viscount Dragon is no longer satisfied and wants to ask the old Viscount Miles to leave Lingdu City, and those Night Lords, because becoming a lord is too far away from their own 5th-class nobles. They want to redivide the territories. Redivide them on their own without the Empire interfering. Chapter 84 Provocation and Suspicion. No wonder no one had approached Ryan before. It turned out that the problem was here. First of all, those mineral veins would definitely not want one more person to share. Secondly, if the territory is redistributed, those nobles want their Lord Knight territory to be closer to themselves, which has nothing to do with Ryan's frozen land territory. No noble would fancy the frozen land territory, and from a geographical point of view, the frozen land territory could not affect the redistribution of land. Similarly, Baron Hatton's Shenma territory is the same. He is the closest to the frozen land territory, and naturally, he is farther away from the territories of other nobles. The only trouble is the conflict with Baron Roche, but it has been resolved now. It is said that Knight Walter has given up the Knight territory and brought his people and wealth to Baron Roche's territory. It will be no less difficult to develop again in the future than his father. In any era, the war over land is cruel, and this has never changed. Ryan can already imagine the bloody storm that will follow. The Flower of the North Wind, this ancient castle, gathered thousands of soldiers, and naturally attracted the attention of the two viscounts. So, only 2 days after Ryan came here, the messenger of Viscount Miles arrived at the castle. It was Viscount Miles's eldest son, Christian Miles. Originally, he didn't want to come, but after Viscount Miles's youngest son, Rag Miles, volunteered, the eldest son couldn't sit still and wanted to show his presence. Baron Ryan, everyone underestimated you. The support of the Clayton family for you is beyond our imagination. Christian looked at Ryan and said with a serious expression. He cared not about Ryan, but the Earl of Clayton's family behind Ryan. Ryan looked at the future Viscount Miles and laughed a little. He asked an irrelevant question. Mr. Christian, you came here alone. Did you volunteer? Christian's expression became cold. Although he came here in a rush, he believed that no outsiders knew about it, and it would be impossible for it to be spread here so quickly. He did not respond to Ryan, but looked at Barnes. Baron Barnes, my father, the master of the Viscount Miles family, the county governor of Lindu County, asked me to ask you why you assembled such a large army. Barnes smiled and looked up and nodded. Ryan. You should answer Baron Ryan's question first, Christian. As a future fifth-class noble, you seem to have not learned the etiquette of a noble yet. You should not ignore the question of a noble. Ryan didn't care, but just said, since Mr. Christian has been silent, he has already answered my question. It seems that our future Viscount Miles has been calculated. What do you mean? Christian clenched his fists, his veins were exposed, and he stared at Ryan. Isn't it? Ryan looked at Christian. Everyone knows that no matter who comes to us, it is impossible for us to leave and disband our army, but Mr. Christian, you took on this mission that will definitely fail. After returning to the Viscount's territory, this will become a stain on you. Everyone, especially the nobles who gathered around Viscount Miles, will see your incompetence. No matter what the reason, you failed. So, this failure was supposed to fall on someone else's head, but Mr. Christian, you didn't apply for it on your own initiative, right? As the eldest son of the Viscount, you can certainly snatch the credit from anyone. The premise is that it is really a credit. Under Ryan's gaze, Christian was trembling all over, and his face was a little hideous, so that he couldn't keep calm in front of Ryan and the others. In the end, the eldest son of the Viscount left with anger and resentment. Looking at the back of the other party leaving, Ryan and Barnes looked at each other. It seems that Viscount Miles can't beat Viscount Dragon, Ryan said with a sigh, because the eldest son of Dragon would surpass this one no matter where he was. Time went back to a few hours ago. Ellis Dragon, the eldest son of Viscount Dragon, rode a warhorse alone to the Flower of the North Wind. He did not enter the castle, but left after leaving a few words. As long as the three barons do not become enemies of the Dragon family, they will always be friends of the Dragon family. I hope the three barons will not be blinded by interests. We can divide all the land together. If the three barons decide to become enemies of the Dragon family, they will become enemies of our 50,000 troops. Our soldiers will definitely trample through this ancient castle and plant the dragon flag on the Flower of the North Wind. It is not known whether this is the language taught by the Viscount or the language of his own organization. In the end, he also gave Ryan and others a little shock. Soon, the eldest son of Viscount Miles will come here. He has snatched a task that should have belonged to Rag. You don't have much time to think. This is to tell them that Dragon can fully grasp the information inside the Viscount Miles family. Faced with such an advantage, Viscount Dragon does not know how to lose. It is precisely because of this that Ryan would try like this. Compared to Ryan, Barnes was much more serious. They can't have 50,000 troops, far from it, but they won't be too few. 10,000 is for sure. With this number, my North Wind Flower can't be broken, but it can make us unable to move, and then we will get nothing. They gathered together for the sake of profit after all. If they get nothing, they will lose a lot. Don't worry, Mr. Barnes, you forgot the most serious thing, Ryan said with a smile. You forgot that our Viscount County Governor is really dying. I thought he wouldn't survive the last winter, but since he survived the last winter, he is destined to be buried this winter. I think this is why Viscount Dragon was able to sow discord within Viscount Miles' circle, but they all underestimated an old man who was about to die, an old guy who could hide his identity as a magician for so many years, especially when the other party knew that his family's descendants had no ability for the wealth and land of the Miles family. He will go crazy. We just have to wait. They will give us a chance. After Ryan finished speaking, he turned around and returned to the castle. He did not have much confidence in Viscount Miles's guess, but felt that if Viscount Miles lost too badly, it would be unworthy of the Viscount's family's means of plundering Lindu County for so many years. Similarly, he also gave Baron Barnes some confidence. He suddenly discovered that the Baron was not as determined as he had imagined to fight against the two Viscounts. Chapter 85, The Battle of Lindu County. On the third day after the repair, the 2,700 soldiers and 1,200 slaves gathered in the ancient territory of North Wind Flower finally began to move towards the Ice Peak Forest under the leadership of three nobles. The three nobles, of course, managed their own armies, but Leon instinctively wanted to get close to Ryan, so he simply handed over the command of the army to Ryan. Baron Ryan, I just want to train a strong army for my father. Leon and said so. He gradually got rid of the influence of Baron Hatton on him and realized that military strength is the most fundamental right of the nobles. Your idea is good, but do you know what kind of army is strong? Leon and thought for a moment, looking at the fully armed knight army behind Ryan, and said enviously, an army composed of extraordinary people. If all of them are knights, then it must be invincible. No, a strong army should not be just the strength of individual soldiers. That is not called an army, that is called a knight group. Good fighting is the most powerful foundation of the army. Do you know what good fighting is? Ryan continued to ask. I don't know. Leon N was very modest. He knew very well that such military knowledge was something that ordinary nobles could not have. Listening carefully at this moment would accumulate the foundation for the Hutton family. Leon N raised his hand and pointed at the army behind him. Go and tell your army, 10 people in a row. If someone walks slowly and falls behind the back row, kill them. If someone walks fast and walks to the front row, kill them. If you can't manage your army, then leave my army and don't affect my soldiers. Leon N left in confusion, and soon there was an angry roar from the back. After some soldiers were killed, it soon became quiet again. In this way, 2 days later, when Leon N saw the Camelon River, he was completely shocked, seeing that his army of 400 people was so well organized. You go. Organize people to cut down trees and build bridges. Because of the location of Barnes's territory, there was no bridge where they wanted to cross the river, so they could only build it. In fact, many wars in this world used terrain in this way. Seeing Harrington leading his men to the nearby woods, Ryan rode his warhorse to the territory of Baron Barnes' army. Ryan, can you sell me a set of your mithril armor? Barnes looked at the shiny mithril armor on Ryan with great envy. He was sure that except for the 3 earls in the entire Northwind province, no one was as extravagant as Ryan. This is not for sale, Ryan said with a smile, looking at Barnes who had not worn knight armor until now, knowing that even if the other party had it, it would probably be used for collection. Barnes, there is no etiquette of nobles on the battlefield. When do you think we should set off? Why not cross the river tomorrow morning? After crossing the river, it will only be half a day's journey to the Ice Peak Forest. We can encounter the armies of the 2 viscounts at any time, Ryan said, and then suggested, why not wait for them to fight first, and then we go a day later? By then, they should be almost dead. Barnes' eyes lit up. Let's do it. That's what I thought, Ryan left with a smile. Standing on the edge of the turbulent Camelon River, he looked into the distance. He could vaguely see the only peak in the Ice Peak Forest, which was covered with snow. A day earlier, the noble army of Viscount Dragon and the army of Viscount Miles had arrived at the Ice Peak Forest. They occupied the east and west sides of the forest. As the nobles failed to reach an agreement, the soldiers below were also on the verge of a fight. Finally, at noon of this day, Viscount Dragon, wearing knight armor, and Viscount Miles, wearing wizard robes, appeared in the place where the magic crystal mine was discovered, in a valley 350 meters long. Miles, you are old, and you still dare to come here. Don't you even want to see this winter? Viscount Dragon, with a crazy face, raised the knight's longsword in his hand and pointed it at Viscount Miles, who was 100 meters away, and laughed wantonly. Miles, if you leave now and give up Lingdu City, I can still guarantee that you can take your wealth with you. Otherwise, when I break through Lingdu City, you will have no chance. On the opposite side, the white-haired Viscount Miles still had a delicate face, but everyone could see the dead air on his face, and he might return to the arms of the Lord of Dawn at any time. Dragon, you are too impatient. They dared to come here directly without dealing with Barnes. Moreover, our Lingdu County is not the only one in the Northwind province, so what? They dare not enter Lingdu County easily. As for Barnes, Dragon sneered. A bunch of little kids, their fathers dare not face my army directly. I can understand their youthful vigor, but I will tell them who will be the ruler of this land of Lingdu County in the future. Father? Are you talking about the Baron of the Frozen Land? Dragon's expression froze, and then he snorted coldly and spoke. Miles, you are really old. Today my army will drive you back to your hometown. After saying that, Viscount Dragon turned his horse's head and returned to the other side of the valley. The ancient horn sounded, and the earth began to tremble. When Viscount Dragon and a group of nobles shouted the glory of the family, the soldiers under his command had already begun to charge forward. Similarly, on the other side, Viscount Miles asked his magicians to tear up the magic scrolls, and the power of prestige attached to the surrounding troops, making them run faster. Soldiers, the glory of war is waving to you. Whether it is money or status, you will get it in this war. Go, kill our enemies, and hang their heads higher on your weapons. Your appearance will scare everyone. Your names will be carved in this forest, and your blood will melt the eternal ice and snow here. Viscount Dragon's voice made the charging soldiers' blood boil. They shouted, and then they engaged in close combat with Viscount Miles' soldiers. Get the cavalry ready. Looking at the chaotic battlefield ahead, Viscount Dragon looked at the nobles around him with sharp eyes. Don't be stingy with your knights and horses. We will all get more if we win this war. Don't worry, Viscount. Our cavalry are all in your hands. A noble next to him echoed, and even rode his horse forward to lead the cavalry charge. He is Enzo Dragon, the son of Viscount Dragon. He defeated Miles' second son alone and became a noble with real power. Behind him, nearly 500 cavalrymen came behind him. Enzo, my child, you will bring me victory. Viscount Dragon's palm fell on Enzo's shoulder, and the Baron's eyes burst into a blazing fire. Father, this war will be as you wish. Chapter 86 Silver Knight Enzo Dragon. Soldiers, we will eventually bring back the glory of victory. Roaring, Enzo waved a knight's sword, and the warhorse under him gradually changed from trotting to running, until it was already running wildly when it was 30 meters away. Kill. In the valley, the armies of both sides charged forward fearlessly, and they had no choice. The guards of the nobles behind them watched every soldier who tried to retreat. Only by moving forward could they have a chance of survival. But as the ground trembled, the stones flew into the air in the vibration. Many experienced soldiers turned pale and slashed frantically to the side, trying to stick their bodies to the stone walls on both sides of the valley. Most of the wars in this world are like this. Thousands of soldiers fought in the valley, and even the commanders of the armies of both sides could not see which side had the advantage in this war. Of course, they did have a way, that is, to observe the cavalry. When the slashing and roaring in the valley had made most of the soldiers forget everything and only knew how to kill, the cavalry of both sides had arrived. The horses they were riding were charging. Whether it was their own army or the enemy standing in front of them, they themselves might not be able to tell clearly, so they waved their weapons and regarded everyone within their attack range as the enemy. When the horses trampled on the battlefield of flesh and blood, screams were heard. The cavalry easily penetrated the chaotic battlefield. At the moment when the cavalry of both sides met, the war was sublimated to its peak. Kill. The knight's sword in Enzo's hand was not ordinary. It was engraved with magical patterns, making the original iron sword sharper and heavier. The power carried by the charge of the warhorse allowed him to smash the armor of the cavalry on the opposite side in an instant. The huge head rolled to the ground, and the helmet like an iron can rolled several times before it could stop and was trampled into meat paste by countless iron hoofs. Bang 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 bang. Compared with Enzo's keen insight and powerful strength, the collision of cavalry in this narrow terrain was more of a zero-distance touch between flesh and blood. Metal armors collided with each other, and the horses that failed to dodge also had their heads blown apart at this moment. Falling to the ground meant death, being pierced by weapons and trampled by chaotic iron hoofs. Perhaps not too many knights were killed by the weapons in the hands of the other side, but in this war, there must have been many knights who lost the possibility of standing up because of a slip and fall. Glory to Dragon. Enzo, who looked like a young man in his 20s, roared, grabbed a head in his hand, and threw it towards the position where Viscount Miles was. Looking at Enzo who was killing everyone, all the nobles on Viscount Miles' side had ugly faces. The son of Viscount Dragon is actually a Silver Knight. How could he give birth to such a talented child? This sentence made Viscount Miles, who had been silent in front of him, clench his palms tightly. His blue palms stared at Enzo, who was like the protagonist in the center of the battlefield, and he almost couldn't help throwing the spell crystal in his hand at him. No one was wrong. He was indeed old and had lost his former spirit. When people grow old, they will inevitably compare their children. But now it seems that Dragon's children are indeed more powerful than the descendants of his Miles family. But he did not dare to attack Enzo at this moment. Once Enzo was killed by him, the matter would be too serious. Perhaps, what Rag is right, Viscount Miles looked at Enzo in the distance, and the whole person seemed to be older at this moment. My Lord Viscount, what should we do? Our soldiers don't seem to be their opponents. The nobles could not see the result from the chaotic infantry, but they could see who was in favor of this war from the knights and cavalry. Obviously, Enzo Dragon, who had killed 5 bronze knights on the battlefield and even needed 3 silver knights to stop the opponent, had already let them know which side the balance of this war was tilting towards. "Kendra, where's your knight squire?" Miles turned his head and stared at Baron Kendra, the most powerful baron on his side except himself. "My lord, the county magistrate, we are ready," Baron Kendra said helplessly, and then under the pressure of Viscount Miles's gaze, he could only call on the 50 cavalrymen hiding in the forest in the distance. This was the most powerful force in his territory. Although he only had a cavalry army of 50, this army made him not afraid of even the Flying Wolf cavalry of Count Winter with the same number. If they were consumed here, even if they got the magic crystal mine, they might not be able to restore the appearance of these guards. 40 official knights, 9 bronze knights, and 1 silver knight formed the guards. "Kendra, you are hiding so well," the other nobles around looked at the 50 knight guards with great envy. "Ernst, go and bring Baron Enzo to me," Kendra waved his hand confidently, and the next moment 50 knight guards rushed out and rushed directly to the location where Baron Enzo was. On the other side, Viscount Dragon's men also sent news. "My lord, 50 more cavalrymen have appeared in Viscount Miles' army." Upon hearing this news, Viscount Dragon looked to the side, and the next moment, the last few dozen cavalrymen surrounding Viscount Dragon also rushed to the battlefield. "Quinlan, take another 500 soldiers to attack." Viscount Dragon's heavy voice once again reduced the army around him by more than half. This time he gathered nearly 5,000 soldiers to come to the Ice Peak Forest, claiming to be an army of 50,000. At this moment, there were only less than 1,500 infantrymen left. Unlike the previous slave armies, these soldiers are real soldiers, not cannon fodder, otherwise Viscount Dragon would be very sad to be killed by his own cavalry. Similarly, the opposite to Viscount Miles is the same. The slave army is cannon fodder and consumables. When one side's infantry army begins to replenish, its own side will naturally respond. This is also the outbreak mode of war between most nobles. You send some people, I send some people, you send elites, I send elites, and we throw them all into the battlefield. Whoever can completely defeat the opponent will be the winner. Of course, the ancient duel method has also improved. That is, when Baron Enzo Dragon was kicked off his horse by several silver knights, a large number of soldiers on Viscount Dragon's side surrounded him and escorted him back. This retreat represented the end of today's battle. Viscount Miles's side symbolically chased for a distance and then chose to retreat. At sunset, the valley was quiet. The soldiers of both sides had retreated, leaving only a pile of corpses. The number was no less than 500, or perhaps 1,000. Chapter 87 Justice from Afar. As night fell, a blazing fire ignited in the camp. Viscount Miles and a group of nobles who had joined him gathered in a gorgeous tent. It can be seen that many nobles are not used to this environment. If possible, they would rather stay in the warm beds in their own territory. Unfortunately, in order to ensure victory, Viscount Miles asked them all to follow him to the battlefield. "It's only July, and it's so cold," some nobles sighed, shook their heads, and hid in the tent, wrapping themselves tightly in bearskin cloaks. "My lord, Viscount Dragon's soldiers are beyond our imagination. He actually has 3,000 trained soldiers. Even if you own Zero Crossing City, you can't train so many soldiers," Baron Ever said, and then he was greeted by several unfriendly eyes around Viscount Miles. In the eyes of several descendants of Viscount Miles, this is dissatisfaction with the Miles family not having so many soldiers. This is what we imagined. The territory of the Dragon family has the richest mineral resources in Lingdu County. They sell the forged ironware to the south where iron ore is scarce, earning a lot of gold coins, Baron Kendra said regretfully. "But now, how can we win?" Baron Ever spoke, making many nobles silent. Although they didn't know much about military affairs, the knights under their command still told them that if the same thing happened tomorrow, they would probably lose the war. Viscount Dragon has a stronger army than them, which everyone discovered today, as well as Baron Enzo. Everyone now understands why Viscount Miles's second son lost so badly. If it were them, the nobles would certainly not admit it. "Don't worry, we will win," Viscount Miles said, making everyone look over in surprise. "Does the Viscount still have magic scrolls that he hasn't used up?" Baron Ever said in surprise. "You will know tomorrow." Viscount Miles didn't continue, and the other nobles could only guess for themselves. The arrival of the second day made the atmosphere in the Ice Peak Forest tense again. This time, Viscount Dragon was in high spirits. He decided to decide the ownership of the forest today. Today, we will drive that old man miles back, and then we will take over his city. It's time to change the governor of Lindu County. Wearing a noble robe, Viscount Dragon looked at his child. Enzo, you are a noble, don't go to the battlefield today. Baron Enzo shook his head and said, no, father, I want to get my glory on the battlefield. Dragon said nothing more after hearing this. Just like what he said, Enzo was no longer just his son, but also a noble baron, a noble like him. He was just more enthusiastic about fighting. Kill, the glory of victory belongs to Dragon, kill all our enemies, and we will get snow white milk and houses that will not leak. On the battlefield, the soldiers of both sides once again charged fearlessly. The soil of this valley was stained with blood, and the reserve soldiers around the two viscounts continued to fill the millstone of flesh and blood. My lord Viscount, I can't hold on any longer. Beside Viscount Miles, a knight with blood on his armor returned and said to the old Viscount in a panic. It's almost there. Viscount Miles looked at the sun in the sky, which was just hanging high above his head. Send them a message. Viscount Miles looked at his youngest son, Rag. Yes, father. The magic scroll was torn, and an illusory eagle flew away. Soon after, the end of the world in the distance was gradually blocked by tall figures. Looking at the dazzling thunder flag, many nobles opened their eyes wide. That's the army of Count Weiss. Everett and other nobles looked at Viscount Miles, horrified. Viscount, you actually contacted Count Weiss? Viscount Miles looked at the noble and laughed. Why are you so shocked? Count Weiss is also a great noble in the Northwind province, and now, the Earl is our friend, he will bring us victory and wealth. Hearing this, the eyes of other nobles also lit up. Indeed, if they can win this war that is already about to be lost, it is not impossible to give some to Count Weiss. Rumble. In front of the army coming from afar, the tall Kens chopped down the axes in their hands, and the trees broke, and soon a complete passage was cleared. 2,000 soldiers rushed to the battlefield in the valley, and the voice of the Silver Knight Artel Weiss on the warhorse roared over the battlefield. Viscount Dragon, you betrayed the friendship between the nobles and started a war against the nobles of the Empire. In the name of Count Weiss, I order you to withdraw. Count Weiss's army. Viscount Dragon looked at the army that suddenly emerged on the battlefield in shock, and the next moment he became extremely angry. That old man Miles actually gave the wealth of Lindu County to others. He clenched his fists and drew the knight's sword in his hand. Even if he is a count, he cannot rob our wealth. Soldiers, charge! The cavalry beside him rushed towards the battlefield. Viscount Dragon, with bloodshot eyes, stared at the distance, as if he wanted to see the face of that old man Miles. On the battlefield, the strength of both sides began to pour towards Viscount Miles. Enzo jumped off his horse and chopped forward with his knight's sword, but a huge battle axe fell down and forced him to block the knight's sword horizontally. However, the next moment his face changed drastically. Looking at the giant in front of him who was 2 heads taller than himself, Enzo was extremely shocked. Why is the power so terrifying? He clearly felt that the opponent had no fighting spirit in his body, which meant that this was a warrior who was not even a bronze knight, but he actually overwhelmed himself in terms of strength. Under the pressure of the 5 iron cannons around him, Enzo kept retreating, his arms were numb and trembling slightly. Baron, retreat, these monsters are too strong. The knights and guards around them rushed over desperately, trying to protect their lord, but they were also facing attacks from other tall warriors. The giant axe could even cut trees, and even if the armor on these knights could withstand it, the huge force would make them lose all their fighting power. Can't retreat, Baron Enzo gritted his teeth and roared. Only he knew that in this war, he had already risked everything. Keep killing, he roared loudly, but the next moment, the giant axe fell from his head and bounced off his knight's sword. Seeing that the giant axe was about to hide him, Baron Enzo was also terrified at this moment, but the next moment, a thumb-thick short spear flew over from somewhere and pierced into the neck of the giant in front of him. Blood spurted on Baron Enzo's face. He turned his head and looked in the direction where the short spear flew. He saw a group of figures reining in their horses on the hillside above the valley. The short spear was the sharp arrow shot from the longbow in the hands of the leading noble. He stood with his back to the setting sun, so people could not see his appearance clearly. Chapter 88, Specializing in Endgames. Time goes back to 2 hours ago. Ryan and Barnes' army had crossed the Camelin River. After walking more than half of the way, at Ryan's request, the army stopped again to repair. Barnes was a little dissatisfied, but still stopped. Ryan then sent out hundreds of knights. As knights continued to return, the army advanced at a slow speed. After walking for an hour and a half, Ryan's scouts finally brought him news. "My lord, we found a large number of soldiers on the western outskirts of the Ice Peak Forest. They have flags with thunder and mountains, and they are from the earldom of Weiss, my lord. The armies of Viscount Miles and Viscount Dragon have already started fighting, and Viscount Miles's army is at a disadvantage." After listening to the news, Ryan understood Viscount Miles's plan. This Viscount seems to have stood by the Earl, and he can even take out the wealth of Lingdu County. He wants to use Earl Weiss to fight against Viscount Dragon. It seems that our county governor also knows that after his death, his successor will not be a match for Viscount Dragon. The Empire gave up the North Wind Province, and Lingdu City is likely to change hands. He can only make such a decision to surrender to Earl Weiss and use the Earl's prestige and army to ensure the glory of the Miles family. Ryan laughed. Then, our chance has come. Half an hour later, Ryan appeared on the periphery of the battlefield. He looked at the gentle slopes on both sides of the valley, which could only be called hills. The only thing that could be called a mountain in the Ice Peak Forest was the towering Snow Mountain. Starting a war in such a place, dare to give up the advantage of height, just to give the cavalry a good place to charge. In the Ice Peak Forest, that valley was the only place without trees. It was precisely because of this that the two viscounts chose to fight there, because if it was in the forest, the cavalry's advantage would be gone. What they relied on was the lethality brought by the cavalry's charge. Ryan led his men to the top of the mountain little by little. In the sunlight, he could see the battlefield below, thousands of soldiers fighting and falling, and the 70 or 80 tall figures in the army of Count Weiss. Are these soldiers made by extraordinary means? Ryan looked at those tin cans swinging giant axes like barbarians, chopping and killing the soldiers in front of them. Even the Silver Knight Baron Enzo was retreating in front of the giant axe. In less than 2/4 of an hour, the army belonging to Viscount Dragon had been defeated by nearly half, and the rest were the unlucky ones who didn't know what happened. One force breaks all laws. Count Weiss is really ambitious, Ryan said, and raised the python bone bow in his hand. This was the material left by the frost python. Ryan asked the magician Lunette to help him make a hard bow. With the help of 2 night breathing methods, his strength was no less than that of the Silver Knight. With a powerful force, he pulled a full bow, and the sharp arrow appeared in front of the barbarian dozens of meters below. Putting down the bow and arrow, Ryan watched the barbarian fall. He was relieved that he did not have the extremely strong vitality he imagined. Then he turned his eyes and saw Baron Enzo with blood on his face. "Mr. Barnes, do you dare to charge together?" Ryan said to Baron Barnes next to him without turning his head. Barnes looked at the gentle slope of about 30 to 40 degrees in front of him, swallowed his saliva, and shook his head fiercely. Then Ryan drew out his nightsword and pointed it to the sky. Under the sunlight, his shadow was gradually pulled to the battlefield below, and was noticed by many people. "Soldiers, tell them whose flag will be planted on this land." "Ryan, Ryan, Ryan!" Thousands of soldiers roared with blood boiling, and the sound resounded throughout the battlefield. Many soldiers below reacted in fear, and then they saw the flag that looked like a rhino horn fluttering on the hillside on the side, and then rushed towards them along the track of the hillside. Seeing the arrival of the army that seemed to be a divine soldier from heaven, both the soldiers of Viscount Dragon and Viscount Miles were terrified. They had been fighting on the battlefield for a long time, and now they had no power to resist the newly arrived army. Kill. Ryan didn't know how many cavalrymen behind him fell off their horses during the rush, nor how many infantrymen could follow behind him. He marched forward, and the tall warhorse under him came in front of the barbarians, waving the longsword in his hand from a high position, and chopped off the heads of the enemies in front of him. These monsters are indeed very strong, but their slow movement is their fatal weakness. "In the name of the stag, grant us sharp weapons," Ryan roared, his blood boiling, and the surface of the nightsword in his hand had a flow of fighting spirit. Then he chopped straight forward. The next moment, the giant axe in the hands of the tall barbarian in front of him was directly cut off by his sword, and even the head wrapped in a tin can was not spared. Kill. Behind Ryan, a knight rushed out, and the knight's lances in their hands were all covered with the sharp edge of the knight's combat skill, the spear of the heroic spirit, piercing through the barbarian in front of them. This sanctuary-level knight combat skill bloomed its absolute power at this moment. More than 100 cavalrymen carried the power of the charge, pierced through the entire battlefield, and then began to ruthlessly harvest the lives of soldiers on both sides. Is Ryan worried that the soldiers of the two Viscounts will besiege him? Of course he is worried, but in such a chaotic battlefield, the two sides cannot pass their orders at all. Even after Ryan arrived, there were still many soldiers of Viscount Miles fighting with the soldiers of Viscount Dragon. Kill. Ryan pulled the reins of the warhorse, and the warhorse jumped high in pain, dodging the huge axe that was chopped across. Then the iron hoof fell and kicked the barbarian to the ground. Ryan bent down and cut off the opponent's head. On the hillside behind, Baron Barnes saw the advantage on the battlefield below and took the opportunity to let his soldiers rush down. He had not forgotten that the benefits between him and Ryan should be distributed according to the merits. Ryan gradually stopped the pace of fighting and stayed in the center of the valley with some breathlessness. Looking at the corpses around him, he instinctively wanted to vomit, but the boiling blood made him extremely excited and forced to suppress the discomfort. In front, the real general had led Ryan's army to kill the army of Viscount Miles. There were only more than 1,000 soldiers. But they were chasing and killing soldiers who were several times their number. They shouted the glory of Ryan and the promised houses, land, and tax-free rights, and beat thousands of defeated soldiers to flee. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89, This is the Game of the Nobles. Many soldiers fled. After all, most of them were slave soldiers. Fleeing was their instinct. The regular soldiers would not stay behind to cover others at the risk of their lives when they saw the soldiers around them fleeing. At the moment when people's hearts were scattered, no matter how many troops there were, it would be useless. Ryan looked at the fleeing army in the distance, and then at the soldiers kneeling on the ground around him. These people had no chance and no time to run away. They could only surrender and pray not to be killed. Some belonged to Viscount Miles, and some belonged to the other part. Master Ryan, Harrington didn't know when he tied Baron Enzo to Ryan's side. Looking at the nobleman, Ryan had no expression. Go back and tell Viscount Dragon that half of the Ice Peak Forest belongs to us. If you agree, your nobles can redeem their soldiers. If you don't agree, then I will kill these captives and then we will continue the war. On the other side, Brand shot a dead body of a silver knight in front of the terrified army. The soldiers around gradually gathered and pointed their sharp weapons at the soldiers of Viscount Miles, who had not even been able to pick up their weapons because they fled. My Lord Viscount, the two silver knights came to the side of Viscount Miles and knelt down guiltily. The three of them joined forces, but they couldn't stop the young man. At this moment, they saw the body out of the corner of their eyes and couldn't help but feel scared. If the battle line was longer, the two of them would also die. My Lord Viscount, my lord asked me to tell you that if this war continues, you will completely lose the hope of occupying Zero Crossing City. Viscount Miles stared at Brand tightly. He never thought that the reversal of the war would come so quickly. Obviously, their army had more troops and they were still in the advantage, so why were they defeated so easily? You joined forces with Dragon. Brand didn't respond, but in the eyes of Viscount Miles, that was the fact. The three barons defected to Viscount Dragon, which led to his defeat in the war. At the same time, Viscount Dragon on the other side also had an ugly expression on his face. They were also worried that Ryan's army would turn around and join Viscount Miles. Father, we can't gamble. If we lose the bet, we will get nothing. If we win the bet, then they can only stand on our side and deal with Viscount Miles. Baron Enzo spoke, and finally made Viscount Dragon make up his mind. Then agreed to them. The participation of Count Weiss forced Viscount Dragon to compromise and share half of the wealth of the Ice Peak Forest. On the other side, Viscount Miles also gritted his teeth and said angrily, go back and tell your lord that the Miles family will not forget this account. In addition, release Mr. Artel. He is the younger brother of Count Weiss. You are not qualified to capture him. Brand raised his hand, and soon there were soldiers behind him who brought a bound Artel Weiss over. This nobleman, who only had the strength of a formal knight, did not have any courage to turn defeat into victory in front of the sudden army. He did bring 2,000 soldiers, but except for the dozens of barbarians, the rest were all slave soldiers, and they had no courage to fight against the wind. The game between nobles is like this. This war failed, and Viscount Miles could only leave and return to his territory with his army to lick his wounds. Soon, Ryan received responses from the viscounts of both sides. He was not very happy, because as long as the armies of both sides were not left here, then after returning, these nobles could pull out an army again. After the orcs went south, the nobles in the Northwind province had many more slaves under their hands. It's a pity. If we leave all their troops here, these nobles won't be able to form a large-scale army in the next few decades, right? Ryan regretted it. Looking around, after cleaning up, he found that the death toll in this war was not as high as he had imagined. It was normal. The military literacy of the soldiers on both sides was not high. The fact that they did not retreat when more than 10% of the casualties were sustained showed that most of the soldiers did not know what was going on. The fact that the slave soldiers did not collapse when more than 20% of the casualties were sustained was because Ryan thought that the nobles led the troops well. If the casualties were 30%, even the regular elite would definitely retreat. Not to mention others, even Ryan's own 200 knights in attendance would be heartbroken if 30% died. Wars are never fought to the end, until the last man. Such wars can be called epics. Not retreating can make history remember, and countless military commanders are excited and try to learn from them. In more cases, like today, after failure, the war can be declared over. This is also the reason why Ryan kept sending out scouts. He wanted to know how many soldiers the nobles on both sides had lost in this war. When the number was 10%, he would not come, but when the number was about 20%, once he appeared, he could change the situation and win the war. Viscount Miles didn't know how their army lost. The reason was here. He could only see that there were still so many soldiers in his army, and he regarded the soldiers in the army as a number. But Ryan didn't. He knew very well that every soldier was a living person. They would be afraid, panic, confused, desperate, and emotional. Everyone is a person, not a machine that would fight to the death if thrown into the battlefield. Therefore, soldiers would flee. If one soldier fled, there would be a second and a third. A large number of soldiers fled, and even 1,000,000 troops would be useless. In a head-on battle, Ryan's army was definitely not the opponent of so many noble coalition forces, but the timing of his arrival was too good. It happened that the tense heartstrings of the armies of both sides were on the verge of collapse, and his army had just entered the battlefield. Therefore, as long as the army of Count Weiss that arrived not long ago is dealt with, then this war cannot fail. Of course, if Viscount Miles organizes the army to camp again, then Ryan will still be at a disadvantage, and even have to withdraw from the allocation of the Ice Peak Forest. Therefore, he began to win over Viscount Dragon. In the way that the two Viscounts check and balance each other, winning over Viscount Dragon can make Viscount Miles leave firmly, and the existence of Viscount Miles can make Viscount Dragon accept Ryan's proposal. The victory of the war is because of human nature, so the victory or defeat of the nobles belongs to the use of the rules of the game between the nobles. As a winner, even if he is a baron, Ryan can loudly drive away other nobles. By the time they reacted from the war, everything had become a foregone conclusion. Even if they were unwilling, they dared not destroy their noble reputation in a short time. Chapter 98 Change of Perspective. After the Pan-Plain War of the Gods, many great nobles realized one thing, that is, the importance of elite troops far exceeds the number of troops. In the face of blood and death, the soldiers who do not retreat are the soldiers who can bring victory. The army composed of slaves is qualified to be slaughtered in front of such an army, but they don't realize this. They are still using slaves to form an army on a large scale, trying to scare the other side to death with numbers. If the army on the other side is the same, it will be fine, but if it is not, then it will definitely fail. In this war, if we didn't come at a good time, too coincidentally, and just waited for the opportunity for the defeat of both armies, we would also be in a hard battle, and many infantrymen would die. On the battlefield, Ryan wrote his reflection on this war with blood. He knew that he was too bold to rush down with the army. If the soldiers of the nobles on both sides persisted for a while, his soldiers would be in a hard battle. After all, the military literacy of his soldiers was only a little higher, and the army that he really recognized was only the more than 100 cavalry. On the battlefield, the thick blood made Ryan's breathing uncomfortable. He tore his expensive silk clothes to cover his mouth and nose. At dusk, the flames of burning corpses dyed the sky. The fiery red sea of clouds recorded the cruelty of the war, and the beasts in the forest were also afraid of the bloody turbidity and silence. Ryan, Barnes and Leon the three nobles, finally met with a dozen nobles from Viscount Dragon. Under the fiery red sunset, The contracts between the nobles will be witnessed by the gods, although the gods don't care about this thing at all. Everything in the Ice Peak Forest will belong to us, whether it is the magic crystal mine, gold mine or iron mine, all belong to the winner of this war, and the 3 baronies of the frozen land, the divine horse, and the north wind flower will reasonably enjoy half of the ownership. The fairness and rationality of the contract will be recognized by all nobles. Swear by the honor of the nobles that a new war will never be started because of the division. The glory of the Lord of Dawn will shine on our glory. Viscount Dragon looked at Ryan and the other 2 in front of him and said expressionlessly, "We will enjoy everything here together." Ryan smiled and performed a standard noble etiquette. At this time, the relationship between them was once again that of a baron and a viscount. As you wish. On Viscount Dragon's side, no noble would think that without Ryan and his army, they would lose everything in the Ice Peak Forest. They could only see that they had received more distribution now, so they gritted their teeth and looked at Ryan and the other 2. Especially the Baron Roche among them. After losing his elite soldiers, the Baron could only choose to surrender to Viscount Dragon. "The war is not over," Viscount Dragon said. "Yes, it's not over yet." Ryan looked at the Viscount without retreating, and Baron Barnes beside him lowered his head subconsciously. They all knew what it meant. The war in the Ice Peak Forest did not mean that the war in the North Wind Province was over. Here they were fighting for wealth and interests, for reputation, and the subsequent wars on their respective territories would change the entire North Wind Province. At that time, it might affect the division of interests in the Ice Peak Forest. For example, if Ryan and Barnes' territories were breached, their armies were annihilated, and they themselves were captured, would they have to exchange the interests of the Ice Peak Forest, or use it as a ransom? Similarly, the reverse is also true. If Ryan led the army to defeat the lords of the entire Lingdu County, then the Ice Peak Forest would most likely be his alone. Is this fair and reasonable? Of course, so the hypocritical nobles have always had many ways to break their past oaths. But Mr. Viscount, Ryan continued to speak. You also saw that Count Weiss sent his brother, Lord Adel, to Lingdu County in person, and Count Weiss actually had an extraordinary legion in his hands. The 3rd extraordinary legion of the North Wind Province has appeared, so before that, perhaps we should still be friends. Viscount Dragon's expression finally laughed after being gloomy and angry. Ho ha, that's right, Ryan. Miles dared to sell out the interests of Lingdu County. This is despised by the nobles. He gave up the glory of the Miles family. We will never allow other nobles to share our wealth. Similarly, Viscount Miles is not worthy of being the governor of Lingdu County. Of course I personally support you to become the owner of that city. Ryan still smiled like a spring breeze. The atmosphere between the nobles of both sides finally eased at this moment. Viscount Dragon smiled and pulled Ryan to share the exquisite food he brought. Ryan was a little surprised. Even when the Viscount was marching and fighting, he actually brought so many things that were not easy to preserve in the army. But looking at the nobles around him who took it for granted, Ryan fell silent. I'm here now. Ryan, you should not have an engagement yet, right? At the banquet, Viscount Dragon looked at Ryan and nodded with great satisfaction. We still have to wait for news from my father and mother, Ryan said truthfully. If he guessed correctly, the Clayton family should find him a marriage partner. He had no intention of resisting this. This world was too lenient for the nobles, and as a noble lady, it was absolutely impossible for her to look like the bucket lady. Of course, Ryan himself was not in a hurry. He had not even celebrated his 16th birthday yet. He was just a 15-and-a-half-year-old boy. This world might be anxious, but he was different in his heart. At this age, he had not even finished school. Therefore, Ryan chose not to hear the words of Viscount Dragon and the nobles around him, such as I have a daughter and I have a sister. Of course, at the end of the banquet, these nobles could not help but sigh and converge into one sentence. Everyone underestimated you, the Baron of the Frozen Territory. No one thought that this war would win, because of Ryan. They had to admit that when Ryan appeared on the hillside with his army, like a god descending from heaven, the army on the battlefield scattered like birds and beasts, as if there was really a god favoring the Lord of the Frozen Territory. Perhaps, we should change our attitude towards the Baron of the Frozen Territory. At this moment, many nobles in Lingdu County had similar thoughts in their hearts. Chapter 91 The Arrival of the Earl's Army. Thunder Mountain, in the fortress of Count Weiss. Looking at a battle report sent back from Lingdu County, Count Weiss's face was gloomy, and then he clapped his hands heavily. I thought that even if the Miles family was old, it would not be like this. I didn't expect that. I still overestimated that old guy. He occupied Lindu County for 30 years, but was defeated by a baron, Ryan Clayton. Count Weiss murmured the name. He didn't expect that the baron who was not killed in the assassination attempt at the beginning would have such ability. Or is this Ryan himself the core of the Clayton family? Count Weiss's face was ugly. He thought that this matter would go smoothly. As his first step, he must take Lindu County and make the Miles family his representative, and then start to plot against other counties in the Northwind province, and finally complete his plan to restore the country, so that he can wear the king's crown legitimately. But now the first step has not been completed as planned. It must be fast. If those nobles also find the other two guys, it will be troublesome. Ice Peak Forest. Ryan, Baron Barnes and Leon and left 1,500 soldiers to be responsible for the mineral veins in this forest, especially the magic crystal mines and gold mines, and there can be no delay. As for the soldiers, they are no longer soldiers now. When they pick up weapons, they are soldiers. When they put down their weapons, they are now miners in this forest. Ryan and other nobles of course left here and returned to the castle of the Northwind Flower. My family has had a dream since my grandfather, that is, to build the Northwind Flower into an independent country. That requires expanding the castle walls and covering the farmland. At the banquet, Baron Barnes was drunk, and the Baroness next to him could only pat him on the back to apologize to Ryan. Ryan could see that Baron Barnes was very excited because they had gained too much benefit from the victory of this war. But he also understood that it was impossible for an ordinary baron to build the Northwind Flower as Barnes said, and even 90% of the earls would not have the financial resources and manpower to build a city like a fortress. Is there such a place? Some Ryan heard the ambition of the Barnes family, but since Baron Barnes' grandfather, such ambitions have only remained at the ambition stage. But now Baron Barnes can finally speak to his grandfather and father, and he has already begun this ambition. But this did not stop Ryan from interrupting Baron Barnes. Mr. Barnes, I think that of the 50% of the mines in the Ice Peak Forest that belong to us, at least 30% should belong to me. At this moment, Baron Barnes sobered up. He stared at Ryan with wide eyes, gritting his teeth. Mr. Barnes, don't forget that we agreed to distribute the benefits according to military merit. Then may I ask, in that war, did you and your army make any key contributions? Barnes was speechless. He was unwilling to admit that he was afraid at the time, but he was also unwilling to give up the benefits that were within his reach. But 30% is too much? You can take 25% by yourself, and Baron Hatton and I will share the rest. Ryan shook his head. Baron Barnes, the division of military merit is not like this. In fact, in the Ice Peak Forest, what belongs to you is less than what belongs to Baron Hatton. Leon, don't go too far, Barnes roared. In the coalition formed by the three barons, he should be the one who took the initiative. In his opinion, he was the one who led the army to kill all around. I will never accept such a division. 20%, I want at least 20%. Ryan looked at Leon and said, you have to ask the Hatton family for their opinion. Leon stood up and looked at Baron Barnes. My Lord Baron, my father will never agree. My army suffered heavy losses in this war. At least 10% of the share is needed. 10%, Barnes shouted. No, absolutely not. I also want to share with my lord. How can this be enough? The banquet ended unhappily, but the next day, the nobles of the Northwind Flower gathered together again. Because Earl Weiss's army was heading towards Lindu County. According to Viscount Dragon, there are at least 5,000 soldiers, and 1,500 of them are semi-employed soldiers. The rest are composed of serfs. There are at least 300 barbarians. Damn it, how can Count Weiss have so many troops? Baron Barnes clenched his fist and slammed it on the solid wood table. 5,000 is indeed a huge number, but Ryan was not surprised. To put it bluntly, it is to throw slaves into the army to serve as soldiers. In reality, what about those slaves holding shovels, hoes, and forks? How can they be soldiers? That's called population. Count Weiss's army must be here to help Viscount Miles. What should we do now? Viscount Dragon sent people here and wanted us to bring the army to his territory to resist together. Regarding this point, neither Barnes nor Ryan had any idea. With the arrival of Earl Weiss's army, Viscount Miles is responsible for all the military expenses. For those slave soldiers, this is one of the few opportunities to eat and drink to their heart's content. Viscount Miles will be under great pressure to eat, so he will definitely attack, but who will be his first choice? Us? Or Viscount Dragon? As soon as Ryan finished speaking, a lord stood up and said, "It must be Viscount Dragon. That Viscount is their biggest enemy." Baron Barnes also nodded and said, "Yes, Viscount Dragon has always wanted Zero Crossing City, and Viscount Miles knows that too." Ryan laughed. "But we have learned from the previous experience that we robbed the wealth that should have belonged to Viscount Miles in the Ice Peak Forest. They could have occupied all the magic crystal mines, gold mines and iron mines, but now they have nothing. Viscount Miles may hate the dragon family more because he is rich and powerful, but the other nobles around Viscount Miles will hate us more. In order to calm the anger of these nobles, Viscount Miles will also send his army to attack us and give our wealth to those nobles in exchange for their support." Baron Barnes, you are a noble and should think about problems from a noble perspective, not from emotions. It is even possible that Viscount Miles will let the 5,000 Earls army come directly to the Flower of the North Wind. After Ryan finished speaking, all the nobles present were panicked. Chapter 92, Encircled by the Army. The speed of the army of Count Weiss and the army of the nobles around Viscount Miles was as fast as the panic of these nobles. Just as Ryan said, Viscount Miles could not bear the food pressure of 5,000 soldiers, and did not let the Earl's army go to Lingdu City, but directly arrived at the edge of Baron Barnes's territory. At this time, Ryan had just completed the initial construction of the defense line. Riding a warhorse and standing at the forefront of the army, Artel Weiss was high-spirited and angry at the same time. "Charge! Capture the damned frozen earth baron to me. I will make him return the humiliation he has inflicted on me 100-fold. With this order, on this flat land, a large number of slave soldiers began to rush forward with various weapons with enchantments, but just after running 100 meters, the slave soldiers at the front stepped on empty air one by one and fell forward. In the big pits, sharp wood and thorns pierced the bodies of these slaves. Blood and screams mixed in their mouths, making the slave soldiers who were originally shouting to charge extremely frightened. The running pace stopped at this moment. The slave soldiers looked at each other and hesitated. The enemy in front was real, and the death of their fellow soldiers in front of them was also clearly visible. They didn't want to die, and even the Count's slave soldiers couldn't change the chaos of discipline. In the back, Artel looked angry. "These damn slaves should all be hanged on the trees. Ash, let your soldiers move forward." Behind Artel, a knight with secret patterns carved on his armor came out. He was tall, and even Artel, who was riding a warhorse, was only half a body taller than him. At this moment, the knight covered in armor was waving a huge butcher knife. The bloody smell of the butcher knife made Artel couldn't help but shrink his head. The guards wearing leather armor began to move forward slowly, and the spears forced the slave soldiers in front to move forward. Facing the imminent death oppression, the slave soldiers could only push forward, layer by layer, and the slave soldiers in the front could only move forward. Their speed was very slow, because they were afraid that there was a deep pit under their feet in front, and they would be pierced by wooden thorns if they fell into it. But the speed of pushing from the back was getting faster and faster, and finally, someone in the front stepped on empty air again. The screams made the surrounding slaves extremely chaotic, but the regular army in the back could not bear it. "Charge, you damn guys, charge!" There were knights roaring, whipping the slaves, and the group of slave soldiers ran again. Screams came one after another, and finally, after hundreds of pits were eliminated, the army finally walked on flat land. It was just because of fear that they were still not charging fast. And at this time, what was Ryan doing? He looked at the army rushing towards him and counted in his mind. 100, 200, 500. Finally, he frowned. The number is wrong. There are only 3,000 or 4,000 troops here at most. Where are the rest of the troops? Ryan had just finished speaking when suddenly, behind them, there were cavalrymen galloping towards this side at a rapid speed. Ryan's face changed drastically and he shouted loudly, "Brand, kill him!" The knight next to him just had time to draw his bow. But the knight's voice had already been heard. "My lord, it's not good. An army has appeared to our east and they are heading towards your castle." Boom! The sharp arrow pierced through the armor, and the knight fell off the horse in an instant, covering his neck in fear. "Ryan!" Barnes roared and looked at Ryan, but the latter looked at him coldly. "Barnes, this is a war. Don't you understand the consequences of disrupting the morale of the army?" Barnes stared at Ryan. "I want to go back to support my castle, Barnes." Ryan was also angry. and he pointed at the thousands of troops in front. If we win this war, nothing will happen to the flower of the North Wind. If we lose, you will lose everything, I won't lose everything, and Ryan, if the flower of the North Wind is breached, I will become a sinner of the Barnes family. I must go back to support. Barnes also looked at Ryan angrily. If you hadn't said you wanted to come out to fight, we should have used the advantage of the castle to resist the army, but what about now? I shouldn't have listened to you and brought the army out. After saying that, Barnes anxiously commanded his army to turn around and go back to support his castle. This time, they brought out all the troops. Barnes was terrified in his heart. He didn't know how long his castle could hold out. Staring at Barnes's soldiers retreating, Ryan didn't say a word. He could understand Barnes's nervousness about his fortress, but he didn't expect the other party to be so stupid. The Flower of the North Wind, that is the oldest fortress in the North Wind province. What does ancient represent? It means that the castle still stands after countless wars. How can it be easily conquered by thousands of troops? The main force of Count Weiss's army is here. There are people in the castle of the North Wind Flower. Those slaves, as well as knight attendants, can call the civilians and slaves outside to come in, and the castle will be safe. But Barnes couldn't listen to what Ryan said. Brand, Ryan roared, and Brand beside him clenched his fists and put them on his chest. Lord Ryan, you take the cavalry to slow down their speed, and the rest of the infantry will follow me to retreat to the forest, Ryan said, and turned his horse to the left with the infantry. There was a small dense forest hundreds of meters away. It was impossible to win in a head-on fight. Most of his soldiers were just slaves. Follow your will, Brand said, and then asked, what about those traps? No need, we will defeat them in the forest, Ryan said, took a look at the enemy army that was already 100 meters away, and then moved forward without looking back. The quality and discipline of his army were much better than those of Earl Weiss's soldiers. When they ran towards the forest quickly, they did not mess up their formation. Charge quickly, don't let Ryan run away. Artell glanced at Baron Barnes who was going away, but still looked at Ryan's position angrily. He knew what Baron Barnes was going to do, but that was not his war. He just wanted to catch the Baron of the Frozen Land. As the slave soldiers ran, several gullies blocked their way. These were dug by Ryan to block the enemy's cavalry, but this time the enemy had no cavalry. Brand led more than 100 knights to attack continuously. Their appearance made the slave soldiers instinctively fearful. Some even hid in the gullies and dared not come out. Don't be dragged down, Brand shouted. He knew what the biggest weakness of these knights was, which was arrogance, but their physique was not enough to crush so many soldiers. Once one of these slaves was fearless and tripped the war horse, even the knight would be killed by the slaves. But even with Brand's warning, several knights still fell off their horses. Some slaves seized the opportunity to cut off the horses' legs. Then the fallen knights were killed by the slaves around them. Only 2 of them were lucky enough to force the surrounding soldiers to retreat and were picked up by the knights who came from behind. Seeing that Ryan had led the army to retreat into the forest in the distance, Brand immediately gave the order. Let's retreat, there was no other way. They only had more than 100 people, while there were thousands of enemies in front of them. When they looked over, they saw a sea of heads in front of them, and under the pressure of the soldiers holding spears in the back, these slave soldiers had to fight them desperately. Rumble. More than 100 knights riding on war horses quickly disappeared in front of the army. Their mobility had no natural enemy on the battlefield. Chase them, Artell was still roaring. Thousands of soldiers continued to chase towards the forest in chaos, and in the gaps in the dense forest, pairs of fierce eyes were staring at them. Chapter 93, All or Nothing. Spirituality. 13,090, Divinity, Blessing of the Deer Spirit. The sunlight penetrated the gaps between the leaves and fell on the ground in patches. The shimmering leaves made the sunlight full of vitality and activity on the earth. It seemed that he was listening to the firm whisper. I will bless you in the name of the Deer Spirit, follow me, defend my honor, and protect my life. Ryan stretched out his finger and tapped the forehead of the soldier in front of him. At this moment, 500 soldiers knelt on one knee in front of him, looking at Ryan with fanatical eyes, and also shocked by the power surging in their bodies. Respected Lord, my master, I swear to be your soldier forever and become your sword. I will be loyal to you until death is ended. The winter cannot freeze my faith, and the morning light witnesses my protection. The soldiers roared in a low voice, as if they were watched devoutly by a stag. But soon, they felt a strong sense of hunger. The blessing of the deer spirit allowed them to have the physique of an ordinary trainee knight without training, but this blessing also made them extremely hungry. They suddenly gained strength, but their blood and ki were difficult to match those of Ryan's knights and servants at this time. I firmly believe in your loyalty, and all you need is to fight for me. If you win this war, you will get rid of all the shackles of the past, become my servants, and witness the pinnacle of this world with me. Ryan raised the sword in his hand and asked the 500 soldiers to eat all the dry food of his army. This will still be very hungry, but it will prevent them from suffering from hunger and death. It can only be said that no matter which world it is, the lives at the bottom have precious experience of starvation. The number of enemies is greater than ours, but I believe you have felt your own strength. You are stronger than them. You have a bright future. You will kill them, then survive. An excellent general must be an excellent orator. No matter whether he is an art student or a noble, he must be able to give chicken soup. We will defeat all enemies, and we will have everything we want. Dreams will appear in reality. So, when Artel was commanding thousands of troops to rush into the forest, he saw a series of hideous and bloodthirsty faces, as if they were beasts that wanted to eat them, shouting some words they couldn't understand and rushing towards them. Kill, victory belongs to us, and glory is crowned Lord, including Lean's army. A total of 1,300 soldiers rushed towards Artel's army fearlessly. These soldiers, who were originally slaves, burst out with terrible power at this moment, killing the enemies in front of them, and almost in a short time, they broke through the formation of the slave soldiers on the opposite side. In such a frenzy, the soldiers on the opposite side were of course retreating step by step. Even those regular troops who suddenly came into contact were all confused. How could it be their turn to appear on the battlefield all of a sudden? Their hands were tense. To put it bluntly, they were just half-time soldiers. They trained a few days a month, looked a little bit good, and had better equipment. They were just civilians, farmers. At this moment, watching the frozen land army rushing towards him, some soldiers actually dropped their weapons and fled to the rear in panic. Thousands of troops were almost on the verge of collapse at this moment. The panicked sounds of fleeing on the chaotic battlefield even avoided the sounds of fighting. Those who escape will be burned at the stake. A turbid roar almost covered the movement of the entire battlefield. The 200 extraordinary soldiers next to Adel finally went out. Under the leadership of Ash, the giant axe chopped forward. Whether it was the enemy or the soldiers who fled back in panic, they were all within the range of the giant axe. On the other side, in the forest, Ryan rode a warhorse, followed by his knights and attendants, who only had more than 170 people left. If we want to win this war, we still have to kill those barbarians and defeat the 1,000 or so regular soldiers. Ryan didn't need to say much to these soldiers. They were his knights and attendants, and he was naturally their noble lords and the object of loyalty. They were Ryan's absolute support. At this moment, the 178 knights and attendants were silent, and even the horses only snorted a few times. They held a shield in one hand and a sharp knight sword in the other. As the horse under Ryan in front of them slowly moved forward, they followed closely. The eyes of the horses under everyone were covered by cloth strips, and they moved forward according to the reins in their hands, until finally, they ran wildly at the edge of the forest. The horses rushed out of the forest, carrying an unparalleled momentum and charging forward. There was no army of their own in front of them, only chaotic enemies. Kill, they roared loudly, and the heavy power of the horses knocked the soldiers in front away, and then the horses trampled and turned their flesh and blood into mud. The army composed of people is not a machine. When the cavalry appeared, the enemy would rather choose to fight with the 1,300 infantry than face the cavalry without any chance. Soon, the roar brought by the cavalry made their front wide. More than 100 extraordinary soldiers rushed directly to the position where Adel was, where 200 barbarians were killing Ryan's army with overwhelming superiority. The arrival of the cavalry was feared by even the barbarians, as the terrible power brought by the charge of the war horses was even stronger than theirs. Boom! The slow-moving barbarians could not avoid the charge, but they also became violent, waving their giant axes to fight the cavalry. Glory will eventually belong to us, Brand roared, directly past Ryan, and stared at a barbarian with the strength of a silver knight in front of him. He bent down to be level with the horse's head, and the shield in his hand exuded a rich blood-red aura. Indistinctly, the appearance of the stag spirit covered the shield. The knight's combat skill, the stag shield, was now added to the shield, and the solid defense blocked the chopped giant axe. and then the unparalleled power brought by the charge of the warhorse knocked the barbarian out. In the back, more than 100 cavalrymen did the same, holding up their shields to block the barbarian's axes, letting the impact of the horse's charge pierce through the barbarian army. Kill. Ryan's strength was equally terrifying, and the knight's longsword in his hand tore through the head of a barbarian. The cavalry army of only more than 100 people pierced through 200 barbarians, killed nearly 20 barbarians, and appeared at the other end of the battlefield. "Dismount," Brand shouted, and before the horses turned their heads, the whole person had already jumped to the ground, and then quickly turned around, holding a longsword and shield to face the barbarian army that turned around. In less than half a minute, the original more than 100 cavalrymen had turned into infantry, forming a square formation of 10 people standing on the ground. They walked in a uniform rhythm, and stared at the barbarian army in front of them with blood boiling. 50 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters. When the two sides were only 10 meters away, all the barbarians roared like wild beasts and rushed towards Ryan's army. At the same time, with Brand as the center, the majestic knight's blood and energy were raging, gathering the blood and energy of the army. At this moment, an illusory stag appeared on the surface of the army. It had a mysterious face and let out a low roar. Kill. Chapter 94, Victory over a large force with few casualties. The victory of this war will be decided by this. When the extraordinary arms of both sides collided, the hard armor also had a dent. Blood gushed out of the crack, and life fell under the sharp blade. The barbarians did not have much wisdom. They were like wild beasts. The blood aroused their bloodthirstiness, and the muscles on their arms were swelling. Similarly, none of Ryan's soldiers retreated, fighting madly in the blood. The blessing of the deer spirit brought not only extraordinary power, but also the belief of protection. They were Ryan's guards, and now their monarch was behind them. The battlefield with less than 400 people played the most tragic scene in this war. Bang! The metal-wrapped wooden shield and the giant axe collided with sparks. Brand's eyes were bloodshot as if a stag was roaring. He pushed out the shield and bounced the giant axe away, while slashing forward with the sharp blade in his hand. The shield of the stag, the spear of the heroic spirit, and the agile steps, 3 knight combat skills burst out at the same time, and the terrible power chopped on Ash's body. The armor blessed by the magic secret pattern also appeared dented at this moment, and there were cracks tearing the metal, making the magic secret pattern lose most of its effect. The sound of broken bones made Ash crazy. He roared and directly gave up the huge axe whose recoil was enough to make his arm tremble, and swung his fist down towards Brand's face. He was so tall that the power of his fist from a high position was not inferior to that of a heavy hammer, not to mention that this was a barbarian at the peak of the Silver Knight. The power penetrated the shield, and the knight's combat skills were not omnipotent. The terrible force penetrated, causing Brand's entire arm to collapse under this power. The shield could no longer block Ash's vision, and he roared and smashed it down again. Brand's arm had no strength to lift the shield to block it, but at this moment, he no longer needed his knight's long sword. The moment his right hand let go, the whole person squatted and rolled to the side. Ash was too tall, but because he was too tall, his arms could not directly hit anything lower at this moment, and the power would disappear at the end of his arms. Therefore, he bent down, trying to make his power fall to a lower place. But Brand also took advantage of this moment of bending down, rolled to the side, and at the same time pulled out the dagger of the giant ear on his calf, and stabbed it towards Ash's waist. The dagger made of the antlers of the giant ear was terribly hard, and the iron armor without the effect of the magic secret pattern could not stop the sharpness of the dagger. The dagger pierced Ash's waist without any hindrance. As blood gushed out, Ash also let out a painful howl. He swung his arms to try to hit Brand back, but his left arm, which had recovered some strength, raised a shield to block it. At the moment when he lowered his shield, Brand clenched his right fist and slammed towards Ash's arm, knocking Ash back while picking up the knight's longsword on the ground. At this time, Ash had just pulled out the deer antler dagger from his waist. The pain made him violent, but the blood flow caused him to be weak, so he had no chance to react to Brand's sword. Kill, Brand roared, and the knight's long sword slashed across Ash's neck. The huge head flew in the air, and the blood gushing like a column made Brand, who is wearing armor, look as hideous as a devil from hell. The fight between life and death is like this. There is no long back and forth, there is only a moment of victory or defeat, and the party that seizes the opportunity can divide life and death at the fastest speed. Death is just a moment, that's all. Even the Silver Knight can't survive after losing his head. There were huge axes coming down from all around, but the shields of the surrounding knights also blocked Bran's front. With the end of the battle between the two peak Silver Knights, the other soldiers were also qualified to approach, so as not to be affected or killed by the terrible power brought at will. This fight lasted for 2 hours. Without any retreat of the extraordinary soldiers of both sides, the barbarians were completely annihilated. As for Edel, he had already fled in fear at the moment when all the barbarians died. Some soldiers followed him. In terms of escaping, every noble was professional. But looking at the nearly 2,000 soldiers kneeling on the battlefield, Ryan knew that he had earned more. He walked on the battlefield stained with blood, and all he saw were fear and blazing eyes. The mithril armor was stained with blood. In the second half of the war, he also participated in the killing of the barbarians. As a lord, nothing was more exciting than such behavior, and it was precisely because of this that the war could end earlier. This is a war. You once belonged to another nobleman, but I am the winner in this war, so from now on, you will become my slaves. In the war, my wealth. Ryan's voice echoed over the battlefield, and then his soldiers began to drive away the captives kneeling on the ground. These people did not react to Ryan's words. It was too normal. They had no right to be loyal to their noble lords. They were just slaves or peasants. Only those soldiers who were qualified to swear allegiance to Earl Weiss could not become Ryan's wealth. Even if they were caught, they could only be redeemed or killed. But those soldiers all followed Artel and left with a lord's escape. So now it is a war, and also a population plunder. These people will belong to Ryan and the frozen territory. Let the slaves clean the battlefield, and the rest of the people rest for 2 hours. After giving all the instructions, Ryan's face did not get much better because of the victory of the war. After all, he also paid a heavy price for this war. First of all, there was the extraordinary army. 178 people fought with the barbarian army, and 69 people died. The rest were all injured, and there were 13 wounded who had completely lost their combat effectiveness. If it weren't for Brand and Ryan's actions later, these numbers would have continued to increase. Ryan was extremely heartbroken. These soldiers were all his most powerful servants. In addition to these, the most tragic casualties were the 500 dead soldiers he temporarily blessed. Ryan used the dear spirit blessing and subsequent glory to make them crazy, so that they rushed to the front of the army of more than 1,000 people, and let their fearless killing permeate the remaining soldiers, so that they could win more with fewer people. The army of more than 1,000 people almost crushed the army of Count Weiss. The fear of those captives was the best proof. But this also resulted in only about 210 people dying out of the 500 people. Many soldiers were killed by the enemy because of the sudden difficulty in controlling the power they suddenly gained, and the sudden hunger and blood loss during the fight. Of the remaining 800 soldiers, nearly 100 of Baron Hatton's 500 died, while Ryan's 300 ordinary infantrymen suffered few casualties, only more than 30. They had no problem following the group of dead soldiers and playing a favorable game. But who wouldn't feel heartbroken over such a loss? Earl of Weiss Ryan certainly had to remember Earl of Weiss for all the new and old grudges. And Baron Barnes. Ryan was never a generous person. Chapter 95, Foolish Barnes. The huge army and the spoils of war slowly advanced towards the fortress of the North Windflower. Behind the army, the straight black smoke in the sky sank into the sea of clouds. Although extremely tired, Ryan was more aware that the disaster caused by ignoring the corpses in the war would be even more terrible. He asked the slaves to pile up all the corpses and dig pits to burn them while cleaning the battlefield. As for the subsequent burial problem, it would be handed over to Baron Barnes, who is in his territory. But I'm afraid this land will become very fertile in the future? The army marched forward in silence. The war and fatigue made the soldiers and prisoners exhausted. Although they were happy to survive, they had to wait until they rested before they could celebrate. Lord Ryan, Leon came to Ryan and said hesitantly. After experiencing the war, the boy also grew up and respected Ryan. Let's go back to the North Windflower. Will it be breached? Ryan shook his head. Flower of the North Wind, that ancient castle is not so easy to break. As long as Baron Barnes is not stupid enough to open the gate of the castle and let the enemy in, there will be no problem. In fact, Ryan still overestimated Baron Barnes. The landlord has a stupid son, but even if he is a stupid son, he will inherit a huge fortune, and it is not the turn of others to squander it. This is how Baron Barnes feels to Ryan now. Maybe Baron Barnes is ambitious, wise, and knows the rules of the game between nobles. He also made his baronies the most powerful barons under the 2 viscounts of Lindu County. He is 100 times better than Baron Hatton, the prodigal son of Shanma County. But he did a stupid thing. When he was returning with his army of more than 1,000 people, he saw the armies of the nobles on the side of Earl Weiss and Viscount miles outside the Flower of the North Wind. He panicked. Facing more than twice his number of enemies, he asked his men in the castle to open the heavy door. That would be fine. If he could return to the castle, his soldiers could easily resist these enemies. The problem was that after his army had been running for an hour and a half to rush back to help, they could no longer outrun the other side of the hillside that led up to their home. When Baron Barnes arrived at the gate of the fortress, the tail of his army had been caught by the chasing enemy. If the gate of the castle was closed at this time, Barnes might still win the war, but he was too panicked. When he rushed into the castle, the soldiers behind him had no scruples and began to push forward in panic to enter the castle. At that time, the soldiers thought that if they stayed, they would die. Only by rushing into the castle, the tall fortress would block all threats for them. This was especially true for the soldiers at the back, so the army was still in chaos. The gate of the castle was so big that how could more than 1,000 people pass through quickly? The beginning of the battle was a massacre. This was the case with the army composed of slaves. When the situation was favorable, there was no problem, so when the battle started with a one-sided killing, the victory or defeat was clear. In the end, it was the Barnes family's guardian knight who stood up and blocked the castle's gate. He led the soldiers who had recovered from their shock in the castle to fight bloody battles and repel the enemy. It can only be said that Baron Barnes is regarded as the most powerful baron in Lindu County for a reason. Of course, the castle of North Windflower is located halfway up the mountain. The slope and road problems also led to the tilt of the balance of victory. However, Barnes' army still left more than 500 bodies at the door of their own house. When Ryan came to the castle of North Windflower, he saw the army of those nobles, looting the village and town below Baron Barnes's castle of North Windflower, which was only more than 1,000 meters away from the castle. The arrival of Ryan's army stopped the looting, but many of the houses had been burned down, and there were constant cries and wails. Naked bodies lay on the muddy streets. Clothes are important to the soldiers composed of slaves, and these things are also the only spoils that will not be taken away by the lord after they return to the territory, because they are really not worthy of them. But these clothes can keep the slaves alive in the cold winter. The arrival of Ryan's army made all parties nervous, but his mithril armor was really dazzling, so the nobles' coalition began to retreat, and Barnes's army gathered on the wall of the castle. Harrington rode his warhorse to the center of the open space and shouted to the nobles' coalition, "Your army has been defeated. Do you still plan to start a second war here?" In the coalition, there was an obviously gorgeous young man riding out on horseback, and a tall figure followed him and looked in the direction of Ryan. Baron Ryan. The young man stared at Ryan, and he never thought that his uncle would fail again, and was defeated by the same person. He was extremely wary of Ryan at this moment. If he hadn't noticed it before, it would have been fine, but now, he thought Ryan was the same as himself. Their fathers were both powerful earls, and they were the descendants of more noble nobles and people in the same circle. The failure of this war made him regarded as his failure in the face of Ryan. "My name is Castor Weiss. You will remember my name because it will become a nightmare for your whole life." After leaving this sentence, Castor turned and left, but the tall figure next to him looked over and his eyes fell on Brand next to Ryan. "I will use your head to commemorate my brother." He raised his foot and kicked the boulder next to him. The next moment, the boulder made a roar and the whole piece broke. Golden Knight. Ryan and Brand's faces were a little solemn. There shouldn't be many Gold Knights under Earl Weiss's command, but one of them actually appeared in Lindu County. "Can we deal with him?" Ryan asked Brand, who was silent for a moment and said, "It will take some time." He was about to break through. In less than a year since he received a blessing, he was about to become a Silver Knight. Such talent made Ryan envious. Even if you break through, you can only deal with the lower limit of the Gold Knight. I hope that Castor is not a favored guy. Ryan knew that the eldest son of Earl Weiss's family was not Castor, so he didn't quite understand this. After arranging his army to detain the captives in the previous military camp, Ryan led hundreds of people into the North Windflower. When he saw Baron Barnes again, the middle-aged man was extremely angry. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96, Priorities are clear. Leon, this is all your fault. As a lord and a noble, of course they would not look for the reasons in themselves. They have never had the opportunity to find problems in themselves since they were young. If you hadn't commanded us to leave the castle, how could my soldiers lose so many? How could my territory be plundered and looted by them? Ryan also looked at Barnes coldly. His anger had not been released yet, and it was Barnes' turn. Barnes, are you questioning me? Between noble allies, one side escaped in the face of a war. Is this the honor of your Barnes family? I have never heard of such a thing in the entire southern continent. Barnes, do you know what you will become if this kind of thing spreads to the south of the empire? You will be spurned by all the nobles. No noble will be willing to regard your Barnes family as a friend. They will only laugh at and be wary of you, a treacherous villain. You, Barnes pointed at Ryan, his chest rising and falling but unable to say a word. In the war, he abandoned Ryan's army. Although he did not escape, he left. This is a fact that no one can refute, and he can't suppress it. Your soldiers died? If you had stationed them in that town, would so many of your soldiers have died, dying at the gate of your own castle, blocked outside by the narrow mountain road and the gate of the Flower of the North Wind that you are so proud of? Your town was looted? Your enemies are not orcs, but nobles as well. The nobles have their own rules. They would never dare to loot your territory without reason in public. It's all because you lost the war here. They are the winners of the war and they deserve the rights of the winners. Looting is one of them. Did they loot the town before your army failed? Everything is because of the war, and the victor enjoys everything. All this is caused by you, Barnes. Not only did you cause the death of your army and the plunder of your territory's wealth, you also caused the death of more than half of my army. Ryan stared at Barnes' face. The hot breath brought by the Flame Dragon Knights made Barnes feel a little uncomfortable, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. Barnes, you probably didn't expect that I would win, did you? I won the victory that should have belonged to us. I inflicted heavy losses on Earl Weiss's army in Lingdu County. I used 1,000 soldiers to win a war against an enemy that was several times larger than ours. This war will be recorded and will be praised, and you, Barnes, will be a dishonest villain in this story who betrayed the honor of the nobility, abandoned his allies and fled. Hearing this, Barnes finally panicked and said in a low voice, I didn't run away, I was just too worried about my castle. Huh? Baron Barnes, you'd better do this instead of getting scared when you see Earl Weiss's army. In addition, you should be thankful that I won the war. Perhaps this victory should have belonged to us three barons. Barnes' eyes lit up. I agree to the distribution of Ryan Ice Peak Forest. You will take 30%, and Baron Hatton and I will take 10% each. Also, when Ryan is recording, can I let my people participate as well? Indeed, this war in which the few defeated the many was destined to be recorded and passed down. Barnes didn't want bad news about himself to spread in it. He wanted to be the winner. Ryan looked at Barnes with a cold smile. Let's talk about this later. You'd better arrange for someone to clean up your territory. If those corpses are left for a long time, there will be plague. Ryan certainly couldn't let Barnes off so easily. From now on, the three noble families will join forces to completely focus on the frozen land territory. No matter from which aspect. Lost, Viscount Miles looked at the news in his hand in shock, and couldn't help but look at it again, worried that he was dazzled. In the end, he had to admit that this was destined to be a war that would be passed down. The Frozen Baron defeated the 4,000 soldiers from the Count Weiss family with only 1,000 soldiers. This war will shock the entire Northwind province. Beside him, Christian couldn't help but worry about his father. Father, at least we don't have any troops going there. This failure is without Miles. What do you know? Viscount Miles roared, like an old beast, looking at the news in his hand unwillingly. Next to him, Rag, the youngest son of Viscount Miles, said, Brother, this war represents the war between Viscount Miles and the Frozen Baron. The family name will appear in the most conspicuous place anyway. Moreover, Earl Weiss's army lost to the Frozen Baron. We no longer have an absolute advantage to deal with Viscount Dragon. In fact, after Viscount Dragon knows this news, he may become proactive and even attack us. We must help Earl Weiss gain the support of the entire Lingdu County, and then use the Earl Weiss family to suppress the nobles of Lingdu County, so that the Miles family will occupy this land forever. But now, Christian looked at Rag, He could hear that these words made sense and were what his father wanted to hear, but his eyes were deeply hidden with anger at this moment. His younger brother had the glory that should have belonged to him. "Kristen, you go out first," the tired voice of Viscount Miles sounded, making Christian even more angry, but he did not dare to resist his father. "Rag, maybe, you are right, a war will be passed down and will change the situation in Lingdu County." Viscount Dragon quickly sent people to the North Windflower to congratulate Ryan on becoming a dazzling military noble in the Empire. Then he invited them to attack Lingdu City together. Viscount Dragon's army had assembled and was about to set out to Lingdu City to occupy the land he had been thinking about. Of course, Ryan refused, and the reason was very justified. He and Baron Barnes' army suffered unprecedented losses and no longer had enough troops. For this, he believed that the nobles would not doubt it, because the victory of a minority over the majority and the lack of geographical advantages was doomed to be tragic, and the failure in front of the North Windflower Fortress was destined to be doubled by those ostentatious nobles. Who knows now that in the mouths of those nobles, Baron Barnes no longer has any soldiers, only slaves. On the 5th day after the messenger left, Ryan learned through scouts that Viscount Dragon's army appeared 30 miles outside Lingdu City, with a number of tens of thousands. Chapter 97 Territorial War breaks out. This is a valley that is not affected by the wind and snow. There are many cultivated fields in the warm valley. This place belongs to a lord of Viscount Dragon. Tens of thousands of troops are stationed here, and in the mansion of the former Night Lord, Viscount Dragon invited a group of nobles. He passed on the battle between Ryan and Adel in his hand to other nobles. Through this war, we really learned something from the Frozen Earth Baron. War really can't be rushed. The army composed of slaves is easy to collapse, and the combat effectiveness is also limited. An anxious war will aggravate this result. It was Baron Enzo who spoke. Viscount Dragon certainly couldn't praise Ryan in person, but Baron Enzo didn't have to worry about it. We can't be impatient in the war with Viscount Miles either. After Enzo finished speaking, he looked at Viscount Dragon. "My Lord Viscount, I wonder if you have any good ideas." Viscount Dragon coughed, attracted all the eyes, and then looked at these nobles and said, "We can't break into Lingdu City. Only those who are as fearless as the orcs can occupy that city." Although they said so, these nobles knew that even if they had several times more people, they would not be able to break into the city of the county governor, let alone sacrifice their lives. Otherwise, why were the Miles family and Viscount Dragon's determined to get that city? How was the city of Hanshin County broken? It took hundreds of thousands of orcs, including Black Goat warriors, to break the city. So I planned to force them out and fight us outside, but how can we force them out? They definitely don't want to come out, a Baron couldn't help asking. Viscount Dragon said with a confident expression, "We are here to exchange for more and better land, not for war." Although they are in Lingdu City, except for the Miles family, not all nobles are in Lingdu City. They have their own territories. The nobles looked at each other and couldn't help but hesitate and deny. "But Lord Viscount, if the nobles plundered other nobles' territories without reason, we would be despised by the nobles of the entire empire and even the southern nobility if it got out." "The honor of the family," someone said hesitantly, and Viscount Dragon also looked serious. "The reputation of the family and the honor of the nobles must not be desecrated. We can't do things that nobles shouldn't do, so we shouldn't plunder other nobles' territories before the war starts." Enzo raised his head, looked at the nobles and said, "So, we have to start the war first." Haven't we started the war yet?" a lord said blankly. He felt that his brain was not enough. "War? Of course it has started, but dear nobles, this war is between the Viscount Dragon family and the Viscount Miles family, not yours." Enzo looked at a lord. "Lord Claus, you are the lord of the Viscount, but I remember that your knight's territory is in the central part of Lingdu County, between two mountain ranges, and is surrounded by Lord Hensley's land." Lord Claus nodded and said, "That damn guy Hensley has been against me before, and now he has surrendered to Viscount Miles, so." Enzo smiled and said, "Why don't you declare war on Lord Hensley based on ancient grudges and noble etiquette? At that time, Lord Hensley will surely return to his territory with his army from Lingdu City. If he refuses your declaration of war, then you can occupy his land openly. At that time, that territory will belong to you. He will definitely come out to fight me," Lord Claus said, and then seemed to react. Each of us declared war on the nobles around Viscount Miles. Even Viscount Miles could not stop them from leaving, But between the Viscount and the Miles family, Viscount Miles will definitely not leave Lingdu City. Of course he doesn't have to leave, Viscount Dragon spoke, looking at Lord Klaus with great confidence. Klaus, you are the lord of my territory. If you want to start a war with another lord, as the noble you are attached to, how can I not send soldiers to help you win? I will support each of you nobles to start a territorial war. If that old thing Miles doesn't say anything, then there will be no nobles attached to him in the entire Lingdu County. Do you still think that old thing Miles will not come out? Pairs of eyes lit up, they were very excited. My Lord Viscount, your strategy is admired by the gods, ha 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 ha. After these nobles left, Dragon looked at Baron Roche who did not move. Baron Roche, if your method works, I will fully support your reconstruction of the territory. I guarantee in the name of the Dragon family that it will definitely exceed your previous territory. Baron Roche stood up and respectfully performed a noble etiquette. It is my honor to serve you. Well, don't worry, if we win by then, the Frozen Baron will not be a big deal, and the wealth you compensated will be returned in full. Roche raised his head with great excitement. You will succeed. It must be said that Viscount Dragon's method is very effective. In the next few days, there were less than 2,000 troops left out of the more than 10,000 troops in the valley. All the remaining soldiers followed behind the nobles and declared war on the nobles who were attached to Viscount Miles. Their troops appeared directly in the territories of those nobles, causing panic among the civilians in the territories. And these panics, under deliberate instructions, soon reached the ears of the nobles in Lingdu City. My Lord Viscount, that damned fellow Klaus actually plundered my territory. He betrayed the honor of the nobility. I will go back and chop off his head immediately. In Lingdu City, all the nobles gathered at the manor of the Miles family. They were angry and terrified that soldiers actually appeared in their territory. My Lord Viscount, my butler told me that among those soldiers, there were flags of Viscount Dragon's family. My army can deal with that damned guy, but I am no match for Viscount Dragon's army. Many nobles talked at once, and Viscount Miles, who was sitting in the first seat and had to lie down, had an extremely gloomy look in his eyes. Damn Dragon, he actually used such a sinister and cunning method. Chapter 98 The Eve of the Decisive Battle. The nobles certainly saw through Viscount Dragon's methods, but they had no choice. They had to return to their own territory, otherwise, except for the soldiers brought to Lingdu City, they believed that they would lose everything, and their people would appear as slaves in the territory of those attacking nobles, and their wealth and food in their warehouses would be plundered. They believed that the other party could do this because they could do it themselves. Similarly, as the leader of many nobles, Viscount Miles could not think of a way to deal with it. Before today, no one would know that Viscount Dragon would do this, and they even built fortifications in Lingdu City. Castor, do you have any ideas? Viscount Miles looked at Castor Weiss who was sitting next to him, and the latter also frowned. He came to Lingdu County this time. One is to help Earl Miles, so that his father can get the support of Lingdu County, and the second is selfish. He wants the Miles family to support him personally while supporting the Weiss family. He knows his father's ambitions and what he wants, so for future planning, he wants a piece of his own rights. This was inseparable from the support of all parties in the Count Weiss family. In his imagination, the Viscount Miles family was the most important support. So he was happy to help Viscount Miles, but he had already failed once, and he only had 1,500 troops left. After a moment, Castor raised his head. Viscount Dragon is doing this because he wants us to leave Zero Crossing City and go to war with him. Since he wants that, let's just leave the city. Even without Zero Crossing City, we still have an absolute advantage. Don't forget, we have more soldiers and we also have more knights. Beside Viscount Miles, Rag still had some doubts. He looked at Castor and asked, but if we leave Zero Crossing City, we will lose the advantage of the city, and we don't know if Viscount Dragon has other support. Castor looked at Rag with some surprise, then glanced at Christian on the other side, and said, don't worry, the two Earl families in the Northwind province did not provide support to Dragon. As for Zero Crossing County, there is only the Frozen Soil Baron. Although his soldiers won the war, his soldiers also suffered heavy casualties, and can't provide any help to the Dragon family at all. Hearing this, Viscount Miles was relieved. He knew that leaving the city and going to war with Dragon was the best choice. Then the elderly Viscount Miles coughed a few times, and said to the other nobles in a somewhat weak voice, the Miles family will also support some of your soldiers, so that you can repel the nobles who invaded your territory. Thank you, Viscount. The nobles thanked Viscount Miles, and then left anxiously to return to their own territories. The dispute between the two Viscounts of Lingdu County finally turned into a big melee in the entire county. In just the past 2 days, wars have broken out in the territories closer to Lingdu City. Every day that passes, new territorial wars will break out, from battlefields of hundreds of people to fights of thousands of people, which permeate every corner of Lingdu County. As for Ryan is training his soldiers. He stood in the military camp, watching Brand loudly scolding the soldiers, and then thinking about the war that is happening in Lingdu County now. The emergence of chaos and war is essentially the result of greed for profit and the emergence of the Lord system. The latter led to the former's transformation from thought to action. The Lord system forced the lords of the Knight territories to rely on the fifth-class nobles. Naturally, the fifth-class nobles would not allow the existence of enclaves, because it meant that his rights would be difficult to reach those places. This would lead to the fact that although those lords were lords, they might have the substantive rights of barons. Secondly, connecting the lords' territories would also facilitate management, and use more population and wealth to develop their own territories. This is also what those lords need. It is difficult for their original territories to have further space. After all, there is only so much wealth that can be generated each year, and it is possible that it will become less and less due to various accidents. Lords also need to rely on the fifth-class nobles to make their status superior to more people. Of course, this is certainly not as comfortable as being a local tyrant in their own territory, so it is hard to say how many of the nobles who started the war really wanted to move their territories to the side of other nobles, but this war is what they want. Before the Lord system is fully implemented, they want to plunder more wealth and more slaves. The nobles of the Northwind province are really tough. Ryan sorted out his thoughts in his mind. He was thinking about what he could get in the next territorial war. After thinking about it, there was no good way. It was really difficult to do anything when his army suffered heavy losses. Protecting the existing interests was all Ryan could think of for the time being. We can only wait for them to have some problems with each other before we can find a way to get in. Ryan thought so. Of course, at this time, the most important thing for him was to train a brand new army so that he could seize the opportunity when it came. Training a similar army was not a difficult task for Ryan, especially since these soldiers were all veterans who had survived a tragic war. His training method was advanced enough, and he gave these soldiers enough things. He could even let these people see the best of them being blessed by the deer spirit and becoming a knight master. How could there be a lack of excellent soldiers in front of such a big pie? Other nobles thought that Ryan had already defeated their elite, but Ryan himself did not think so. The peace in the territory of North Windflower continued, but the war between other nobles in Lingdu County was in full swing. Ryan even knew that in other counties in the North Wind province, frictions of varying sizes were also breaking out. The territorial frictions caused by the Lord system were getting more and more intense. Around mid-August, the armies of the two Viscounts in Lingdu County finally confronted each other on a plain. Among the 3,500 soldiers belonging to Viscount Dragon, more than 1,000 of them were temporarily transferred slave soldiers who had only undergone about 10 days of training. There were also 5,000 soldiers belonging to Viscount Miles and Castor, half of whom were slave soldiers, about 2,000. Chapter 99 Planning. In the traditional trash talk session, Viscount Dragon went there in person, but Viscount Miles could only sit in the carriage now. Miles, what's wrong? Are you dead? I thought you would die this winter, but I didn't expect you to die now. It seems that you won't be able to see this year's God's Grace Festival. Next to the carriage, Rag Miles shouted on behalf of Viscount Miles. Dragon, my father sends his greetings to you. He told me to tell you that you will die as early as your father. My father lived 30 years longer than your father, so I'm not comparing my age with you. A stinky boy. Dragon's face darkened. The most important reason why he was able to inherit the title at a young age was because his father died early, and Viscount Miles was indeed a figure from his previous era. Who the hell are you? How dare you talk to me? Even if Miles is old and can't die, where is that Christian? Is he guarding the Zero Crossing city that belongs to me for this Viscount? Rag looked at Dragon proudly. Big brother, of course, you have to take care of the territory of the Miles family. Also, Viscount Dragon, you are a noble, you should respect the orders of the Empire. The Miles family is the county governor of Lingdu City appointed by the Empire, not you. Dragon, go to the south of the Empire, go to the prosperous west coast. You can only say that you are Viscount Dragon, not the county governor of Lingdu County. Humph, Dragon snorted coldly. In this regard, he really couldn't make any claims, but who in the south of the empire knew the situation in the Northwind province? What he wanted was actual interests, rights and land. I will take away the wealth that belongs to me, Dragon finally said. You will die in your fortress. Rag's voice was loud. Kill. The army collided and fought on the muddy land. Unlike those battlefields where slave soldiers were the main force, most of the troops in this battle were trained regular troops. They wore armor and inserted sharp spears into the enemy's body. The bloody smell brought by the blood could make their blood boil, and they madly killed more enemies. Knights rode their war horses across the battlefield. Their power was absolute in such a war. Their iron hooves trampled on flesh and blood, and their sharp swords could tear apart the soldiers' leather armor, which was not hard. Victory belongs to Dragon, Baron Enzo roared. He was the only fifth-class noble who participated in the war. The strength of the Silver Knights frightened many soldiers, but fear could not stop him from coming. However, in the end, someone stopped Baron Enzo's killing. It was 2 Silver Knights who joined forces. Seeing this, Baron Enzo could only retreat. The war lasted for an hour. When the horn sounded, the armies of both sides began to retreat. Only the immobile corpses were left on the battlefield. A war involving tens of thousands of people could not be decided in one go, not to mention that this war was related to the future of Lingdu County. Tomorrow, we need to kill their knights. In the evening, Castor found Viscount Miles and said fiercely. He looked at Viscount Miles lying on the bed and unable to get up, frowning, and then looked at Rag standing next to him. My lord, how are you doing? The weak voice of Viscount Miles sounded on the bed. Castor, don't worry, I won't die before this war is over. As for wanting to kill those knights around Dragon, it's not a simple matter. What are you going to do? Listening to the no longer clear voice of Viscount Miles, Castor was already thinking about whether to communicate with that Christian, but he still replied, My lord, I plan to give our soldiers the Fury Potion. Hearing the name of the Fury Potion, it was obvious that Viscount Miles's breathing became rapid. He struggled to sit up from the bed and looked at Castor. The price of that thing is too high. It is simply not something we can afford. Unless you bring a priest of the Holy See with you, there is definitely no priest. The relationship between the Empire and the Holy See is destined to make it difficult for the power of the Holy See to appear in any corner of the Empire. My Lord Viscount, Castor looked at Viscount Miles with a serious look and said, You should know that we must win. The Miles family cannot lose Lingdu County and Lingdu City. Both my father and your family must see this war end by us. Viscount Miles fell silent. He had too much on his shoulders. Indeed, this war concerning the ownership of Lingdu County must not fail. Otherwise, they will lose everything. The Fury Potion can only maintain the double increase of the knight's strength for half an hour. Once the time is over, it will leave an injury that is difficult to recover. We must end the war within half an hour. We cannot let the other side have any possibility of discovering it. In addition, I have only one request. Viscount Miles looked at Castor. Dragon must die, and Ellis Dragon must also die. Ellis Dragon is the eldest son of Viscount Dragon and the future heir to the Viscountship. You know, the assassins we send out are already preparing to assassinate, and Ellis has little chance of surviving. No, he must die. Viscount Miles stared at Castor, who fell silent and nodded. I'll have someone notify the assassin immediately, but your excellency, we can assassinate Ellis, but it's impossible to kill Dragon. Even if our soldiers catch him, we can't kill him. He's a noble, a viscount. Nobles can't die in such a war. Castor looked at Viscount Miles in front of him very seriously. He felt that this viscount was a little too crazy. No viscount nobles had died in the Empire for many years. Indeed, nobles can't die in such a war, but that's you. Viscount Miles's turbid eyes were full of murderous intent. I am about to die. Before I die, Dragon must not be allowed to live. Otherwise, even if they lose this war, Earl Weiss will not be able to get all the support from Lingdu County. You can't kill him, but I can. Who can care about a dead man like me? For the sake of the Miles family and the Earl's plan, I will kill Dragon even if I am despised. Viscount Miles looked at Castor with murderous intent in his eyes. After a long time, Castor sighed. Since you have decided, let's do it. Chapter 100, Decisive Battle. Early the next morning, the armies of both sides gathered on the battlefield again. This time, the armies of Viscount Miles and Castor were extremely crazy. If you win this war, I will exempt all your taxes this year, and I will release all the slaves. All you have to do is win the war for me. Viscount Miles was no longer as old as he was yesterday. He floated in the sky. All the soldiers looked at him in shock. This great magician used levitation to make his army look up to him. On the opposite side, Viscount Dragon looked at Viscount Miles floating in the sky and sneered. This old man seems to be dying. He uses magic to make himself shine again, but how long can he last like this? Then let's end this farce today. Viscount Dragon's eyes revealed a cold and playful expectation. The next moment, he swung the longsword in his hand. Soldiers, charge, kill! The war was about to break out. When the infantry of both sides gathered in the center of the battlefield, the knight army of Viscount Miles appeared on the side of the battlefield. As many as 600 cavalrymen rushed towards Viscount Dragon, and behind these cavalrymen were 112 barbarians. Grey will deal with all the enemies, Castor said confidently. He looked at the tall figure charging in front of the barbarians. This was the source of his confidence in the victory of this war. On the battlefield, a bottle of blood-red potion appeared in the hands of the knight army charging in front of the barbarians. While reciting the glory of the knights, these knights took the fury potion. Kill! Even the horses under them trembled slightly at this moment. They felt the rich and majestic blood, and the breath of the top of the food chain mixed in it made them afraid. The knights of both sides collided at the edge of the battlefield, and the moment of contact, the faces of the soldiers on Viscount Dragon's side changed. How can there be such a terrible power? Some knights were extremely shocked. At the moment of fighting, the power from the opponent made their arms sore. The knights who did not react were killed and fell off their horses at the moment of the charge. The surviving knights looked at the blood-red eyes of the enemies in front of them and had bad guesses in their hearts. They swallowed the drugs. Baron Enzo's face changed drastically and his voice roared. Hold them and wait for the effect of their drugs to end. Hold? What can you hold them with? I don't know when. The loud voice resounded in this battle of knights. Grey had appeared alone in front of Baron Enzo. The huge axe in his hand chopped down at this moment. The beast-like breath frightened the warhorse and raised its body high. The huge axe fell and chopped directly on the chest of the warhorse. Under the blessing of absolute power, the sharp huge axe tore the warhorse into two halves. Baron Enzo also reacted at this time, but the sudden sense of weightlessness came and he fell to the ground. Grey looked down at Baron Enzo, who was lying on the ground spitting blood. There was still reason in his eyes, otherwise he would have killed Baron Enzo with his horse. He held the axe in one hand and punched Baron Enzo with the other hand. The terrifying force made the Baron's face change drastically at this moment, but he couldn't avoid the punch no matter what. The huge force made the armor on his body dent, and at this time, the knights around him finally reacted and called out anxiously. Lord Enzo. Dozens of knights were extremely angry and rushed towards Grey, but facing the siege, Grey was not afraid at all. These knights couldn't charge on horseback, so how could they be his opponents? Boom! The huge axe was swung horizontally, and the terrible force tore the horse in half, and the knight on it also died. Grey stood beside the unconscious Enzo, constantly swinging the huge axe to kill the knights around him. After killing more than a dozen knights, no knight dared to approach here, and at this time, the 100 barbarians in the back also came to Grey's side. Looking at Viscount Dragon, who was just a few hundred meters away, Grey no longer paid attention to the knights around him who wanted to save Baron Enzo, and rushed out with 100 barbarians. He knew what he needed to do in this war, which was to clear all the defenses around Viscount Dragon. How dare you stand in front of me? A simple 100 barbarians were definitely not the opponent of the hundreds of knights, but at this moment, with Grey, the golden barbarian, standing in the front, and the knights who took the fury potion around to assist, the knight army of Viscount Dragon began to collapse in just a few minutes. Knights are also human beings, they will also be afraid, and the fear of slave soldiers will lead to the collapse of morale. Although they barely step into the extraordinary, it does not mean that they are fearless. When the knight army began to retreat continuously, Viscount Dragon in the back was a little panicked. But his expression was relatively stable. He ordered the soldiers beside him to light a flaming arrow, and the next moment the flame shot straight into the sky. This is, in the distance, Rag, who was beside Viscount Miles, narrowed his eyes slightly, and then he felt that a dense army appeared in the deep forest on the side. Viscount Dragon actually has reinforcements. Viscount Miles was also shocked, and then he saw the high-raised flags in the army. Baron Roche and Baron Kendra. At this moment, Viscount Miles's face was terribly ugly. Before, Baron Roche appeared in front of Baron Kendra with his army, and a war broke out between the two barons. Baron Kendra also took his own army and some soldiers supported by Viscount Miles from Lingdu City, but now it seems Kendra, you dare to betray the Miles family. Rag was roaring, he was angry and terrified. Baron Kendra was the most powerful noble in Viscount Miles's camp besides the Miles family, and in the entire Lingdu County, the Kendra family was also the richest. People in the circle compared him with that Barnes. Who would have thought that Baron Kendra, who had followed the Miles family to the Northwind province for decades, would actually betray them and join Viscount Dragon? Rag Miles was extremely angry, but Baron Kendra, who suddenly appeared in the distance, looked expressionlessly at the Knights of Miles who were about to rush to Dragon and waved his knight sword. Soldiers, help our friends and kill all the Knights of the Miles family. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.